Good morning. My name is Sarah Fossoltz. I serve as the board administrator for the Texas State Board of Examiners of Marriage and Family Therapists. I'd like to call the roll. Chair Merchant.
Present.
Dr. Barty.
Present.
Dr. Elder.
Present.
Mr. Francis.
Present.
Mrs. Hubsband Thompson.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Parrish.
Present.
Pastor Skoma is not attending. Ms. Smith
Present.
and Chaplain Stallman.
Here.
Thank you. With that, I turn it over to Chair Merchant.
Okay, welcome everybody to our board meeting. I call the meeting to order at 9:09 a.m. Agenda item number 2 is approval of minutes from July 23rd. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Okay. Is there?
This is Elder.
Did we freeze?
I don't know.
No, I've still got you. You froze.
Want to give her a minute to unfreeze? Oh, Jody.
Yeah, am I here?
Yeah, you're here now.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize. I make a motion that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, item number 3, board review and possible action regarding appeals of application for licensure denials. We do not have any of those to hear. Item number 4, board review and possible action regarding agreed orders to be executed by the board. I don't believe we have any of those either.
Not last report.
Say that again.
You're correct.
Number 5, board review and possible action regarding contested cases from the State Office of Administrative Hearings. We do not have any of those either. Number 6, report of agreed orders executed by the council's executive director. We do have several of those. Is there anything that you want to say about this, Sarah?
Only if the board members have questions.
Okay, does anybody on the board have questions about these? Yes, Dr.
Chair Merchant, I wanted to ask, is this the appropriate place to raise concerns about the coaching situation, or does that come later in the agenda?
Can we raise that concern now, or do we save that for future directions?
I would, attorneys correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's to be a discussion in general about the coaching situation as opposed to a particular case, then I might ask you to reserve that until the agenda item on future board priorities. Okay.
That would probably be the best way to do it, and we can add it if it's something to be discussed in length. I'm not really sure what you're just talking about life coaching or people doing coaching. Is that the general topic? I'm not really sure what the
Basically, somebody had their license revoked, and instead of, basically they now are just doing coaching. And so they
right.
so
Okay.
they have their license revoked, but they're doing coaching and stuff.
And it's one of these orders that we have here that we did. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if it's a broader topic, I would say let's bring it up for a future agenda and put it on there. We can certainly discuss it in greater detail, because that's the main issue. Is if it's not on the agenda, the public doesn't have notice of it. So we need to probably do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other conversation about number 6? Okay, then we'll move on to number 7. Report of cases dismissed by the council's executive director. Y'all had some information about this. Are there questions or comments about agenda item number 7? Okay, then we'll move on to number 8, status report of quarterly enforcement activities. Is there any conversation about number 8?
I should note to the board that an updated report was provided to you on October 18th. All of the numbers were the same except for the numbers counting informal settlement conferences. So that updated one is in your packet. If you downloaded it before October 18th, you might need to go back and get that to get the updated report.
Dr. Elder?
I just would like to go on record as saying the numbers are trending amazingly in the right direction. We just have such a reduced number of cases, an increased number of cases that have actually been through the process, and a reduced number of cases in backlog, particularly for the later years. And I just want to applaud staff for their incredible diligence and hard work to push these things through.
I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Elder, because I was going to say the exact same thing. Yes, I mean, like, we have cut our numbers in half of pending complaints in the last year, and I'm just absolutely blown away at how hard staff is working, the attorneys are working to like clear this backlog. So just, again, amazing progress.
I actually have a question. I'm looking at third quarter FY21, and the numbers for cases resolved this quarter was astronomical, and the cases dismissed by staff was also astronomical. How did that get accomplished in one quarter? Those are great numbers, and they're so drastically different than other quarters.
So
Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
I was going to say, we started as a new agency in September. And it took us some time to kind of get our feet on the ground, and then a number of efficiency changes were realized. But Attorney Patrick had a front row seat, so he might be able to. And I think some hiring processes were completed, and we had actually a full staff in the third quarter. But that might have been short-lived. So Attorney Patrick had a better view of that than I did.
I would echo everything that she just said. I mean, a lot of it is brand new agency. We didn't get to even work on any of these cases until September 1st. They showed up, all 1,379 of them on our doorstep, and then we had to start running them through the process. And so there's obviously a curve, and I think everything kind of came to a culmination there in that third quarter where we started hitting our stride and moving through a bunch of these cases. So I don't know that we'll have another gangbuster third quarter, because I think everything kind of peaked, but I think we'll still be running pretty efficiently. But obviously I think there's hiring issues too, about keeping everybody fully staffed, and enforcement fully staffed, and legal fully staffed. So it'll be, it's just part of the process. But yeah, I think that's just the way the numbers worked out. So it was fantastic to see.
I was going to, am I allowed to say these? Like, I guess that's okay for, like, I can say these numbers on here, that this isn't like that. We started off last year with 1,300 backlogged cases. We're down to 634, which 634 might sound like a lot, but that's over half. I mean, anyways, y'all have just done tremendous work. I mean, if you look at the number of cases dismissed, the number of cases resolved every quarter, anyways, you guys are doing tremendous work. So just thank you for, and I know that our licensees have to appreciate it too. Nobody wants a complaint hanging over their head for years. And so for y'all to be able to be getting to these so quickly, I'm sure that our licensees appreciate it as well. Okay, any other further comment on agenda item number 8? Okay, then agenda item number 9, report of compliance with agreed orders. Is there any comment, discussion, anything I want to say about number 9? Okay. And then, so then number 10 is report from committee chairs. First up would have been Reverend Dr. Skoma with the Ethics Committee. To my knowledge, I don't believe the Ethics Committee has met or sat in on any other meetings. Is that true?
To my knowledge.
To my knowledge, yeah. Okay, so I don't think that there is a Ethics Committee report. Their Licensing Standards Committee, we were supposed to meet this quarter, and I'm the chair of that, and I did not call a meeting. So I apologize for not calling a meeting for the Licensing Standards Committee. We do need to meet though. The Licensing Standards Committee does need to meet because we need to discuss, I have a note here. We need to meet. So Sarah, remind me, who all is on the licensing standards committee?
Dr. Merchant, Mr. Parrish, Reverend Dr. Skoma, and Ms. Smith, with Chaplain Stavlin as a backup.
Okay. Um,
Dr. Merchant, I wanted to ask if, as the licensing standard committee, I went back and was looking at notes from our July 23rd meeting, and it says there was some discussion about maybe adding a Texas ethics component to the LMFT supervisor JP exam. Or no, I'm sorry. A Texas ethics requirement for LMFT supervisors as part of their CEs, that we discussed that as a possibility because we can't have different standards for supervisors who are coming from out of state than we do for supervisors who are in state. And one of the ways that we resolved that was just to require Texas ethics for all LMFT supervisors, so that we make sure everybody, whether they're coming from out of state or they're already in state, is familiar with our Texas rules as part of their ethics. So I'm wondering if that would be something, it was supposed to, I guess, be referred to the licensing standards to discuss.
yeah, we can put that on the agenda for that meeting.
Dr. Merchant, also coming from the BHEC Standardization Committee,
Mhm.
we need to be meeting so that we can discuss how we do our CEs, as well as keeping telehealth in part of our CEU package. So those would be some other things to put on this agenda for this committee to look at.
CEUs might actually fall under the professional development committee, as opposed to licensing standards, though.
Actually, it's going to fall in both, because when we're looking at standardization, we're looking at how many, the amount that would be required from our profession versus LPC, social worker, psychologist, seeing if we can get more of a standardization across the board of how many we do. So whichever one it goes to, I need to give that information and have you guys talk about it so that you can give me feedback for that committee. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're on the licensing standards committee, do you have your calendar in front of you? Could we just go ahead and set a date and time? How does y'all's November look?
It looks good, but it needs to be after the first week of November. So one of those two middle weeks would work for me.
Likewise.
Man, my calendar is full in November.
And Mrs. Smith, remember the standardization committee meets the 15th of November.
Would you
Yes,
like for us to meet before then?
it would be helpful because we're talking about a lot of stuff that we're about to propose. So I would love to get some feedback on some of these issues.
So the week of November 8th, I have a social work board commitment on Wednesday, the 10th. Veterans Day is Thursday, the 11th.
Could y'all by any chance do next week?
I've got BHEC all day on Tuesday. And then I'm going to be out of town Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'm sorry, Lisa, and I see clients all day on Wednesday. That's a little quick. And really, when I'm talking about this meeting, I don't see this as lasting longer than an hour. So we're looking at just carving out an hour.
Well, we have, okay, so it depends if we're going to talk CEUs, Texas supervisors, and then there's a third item we need to talk about. I just can't remember what it is. Jody, what were you and I talking about yesterday?
You're muted. Jody, you're muted.
Sorry. You know what? Let me pull up that email real quick so we can make sure it gets on the agenda. Because I know
I have in my notes, it was guidelines for social media and for teletherapy. You talked about Do we adopt the psychology boards and or LPC boards? Or look at AMFTRB, send a link, have a link to AMFTRB?
Would that go here or would that go to rules?
Well, it's,
No, licensing standards.
I think licensing standards is the best fit for professional standards to
Okay.
be discussed. If it were to be codified in rules, then it might go to the rules committee. If it's a guideline, which is
That's true.
better above and beyond a minimum standard, but more toward a best practice, then I don't think it would be the rules committee. But certainly the full board would look at any particular policy before it's
Right.
posted.
Okay, well then we'll schedule a meeting, hopefully just an hour to talk about CEUs. And then if we need to have a longer meeting to talk about supervisors and social media guidelines, then we can schedule a second meeting to discuss those things before our January meeting. Okay, so you said not the first week in November, right?
I can do it on the 2nd, Tuesday, the 2nd. Not Monday, the 1st. I'm sorry, I'm already totally booked that day, but, and don't kill me, those of you that are on this committee, but would anybody maybe consent for just an hour on a Saturday?
I mean, I could do,
I would say the earlier the better.
Mhm.
well, earlier on a Saturday, I work until 11 o'clock every Saturday morning, so I'd have to do Saturday afternoon.
Okay, you need a different job. Not really.
I know. Tell me about it.
Okay, I was just
That's fine.
throwing that out there.
I could do that.
But I could do Tuesday, the 2nd in the afternoon.
Understanding that TCA in Galveston begins on the 3rd, so some people may be traveling on the 2nd. No one's traveling on the 2nd? Okay.
So Daniel, could you do Tuesday afternoon?
I sure can.
If y'all want to do 2 o'clock?
That'll work.
That'd be great. Sarah, will you send us a link for that meeting?
Will.
Okay.
So I gotta make sure this Chaplain talking. So am I on that committee or am I on the backup? So do I have to be there or?
I put it on your calendar but there, you shouldn't have to attend. I'll just double check with Dr. Skoma and see if he can, basically, if he can attend, then you won't need to. If he is unable to attend, then we would invite you to be a part of that conversation.
Okay, if I am, just for consideration, I have a standing meeting from 1 to 2. And if you could do 2:30 to 3:30, that would be good. If you could do it that day.
Okay. Yeah, well then we'll put it to 2:30, so that way, if Anthony can't join us, then Chaplain Stockland can.
All right, I'll pencil in 2:30, and then if I don't need to be there, I won't. But if I do, I know I need to be there, be ready.
And Dr. Merchant, I will send out the materials that we've been discussing in BHEC ahead of time so that you guys will have a chance to look at everything.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And while we're on that, Sarah, could I ask you to pull up the other committee that we've been talking about? Because Ms. Jenny Smith has been talking about overlapping. Who's on the other committee that we've been
So
talking
the
about?
Professional Development Committee is chaired by Mrs. Husband Thompson. Dr. Barty, Dr. Elder, and Mr. Parrish are also on that committee, and Ms. Smith is the backup for that committee.
But Chaplain Stogland, I was talking about a committee that I'm on for BHEC, not
No,
for.
I got that, but you were saying how it overlapped and how some of the codification and the discussion may go to standard and then licensure. And I just wanted to make sure who was on that other committee in case the conversation spilled over into that committee, just for clarification. You were clear. I just wanted to make sure who's on the committees before we go forward. Thank you.
I'll go ahead after this meeting and send a committee list so it's fresh in your minds. And after I confirm who can attend the November 2nd meeting, I'll send those meeting invitations so you know what you need to do.
Any other conversation about the licensing standards committee? Okay, The next thing would be a report from the outreach committee. I also chair that, and I also have not called a meeting for that, so I apologize. So if you're on the outreach committee, can we also go ahead and schedule a time to meet? And can you, Sarah, remind us who is on that?
The outreach committee is Dr. Merchant, Mr. Parrish, and Ms. Smith.
Oh, again,
There are two backups, Mr. Francis and Reverend Dr. Stone.
okay. We don't need to meet though right away. So do y'all want to schedule something maybe for early January? Okay, let's look at early January.
Dr. Merchant, I'm like the fly in the ointment today. I'm sorry about that. I will actually be out of the country from January the 11th until January the 25th. I'll be in Egypt. So
Oh, fine. What are you doing in Egypt?
just taking a tour, going around to Egypt. And I have decided I am not taking, and I am not going to check in with any job, any client, any committee. So I will be, don't call on me for anything.
When you signed your board commitment, you agreed no travel for 6 years. Did you not read that fine print?
No. Happy to give up my post.
Well, how about just sometime that very first week, maybe the 6th, Thursday the 6th or something? Would that work for you too?
After 1 o'clock, because I have a noon meeting from 12 to 1 that's standing on that first Thursday. So anything after 1 o'clock works for me, Lisa, Dr. Merchant.
Let's do 2 o'clock then.
Okay.
Also, I know that we have several people who will be presenting. Dr. Elder, Dr. Barty, I know that both of y'all will be presenting at TCA soon. I do have a PowerPoint that y'all are welcome to use. I'm going to get that updated. When is TCA?
We present on Friday, November 5th.
Okay, I'm gonna get y'all that sometime next week. I was hoping to get it to you yesterday, but things did not work out. So I will get it to you sometime next week, hopefully before Wednesday. It's a pretty easy PowerPoint, and I don't think it'll be, anyways, it'll be fun. It'll be good. So
Thank
Okay.
you.
you're welcome.
Dr. Merchant, if
yes.
for the substitutes for the committee meeting, if you can also include us on that invite, please, so I can block the calendar just in case I need to be there for that January 6th meeting. And Ms. Fasshold, if you can make sure that goes to my Amazon account onto that calendar, because it's during the day and I want to make sure that I block it off from any meetings during that one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have a report from the Professional Development Committee. And so Ms. Husband Thompson, what is there a report?
Good morning. We haven't met since our last meeting, and I was going to ask Sarah if she saw a need for us to meet in the next quarter before our next meeting.
In the next agenda item on 11B, there might be some discussion about Rule 801.205. That's the one about disaster declaration and remedy for someone who was not able to meet all of the usual licensing requirements. I did not choose to write a question for the JP exam for that particular set of rules, since I don't think they will be used as frequently as others. But if that discussion changes, then it might be for the Professional Development Committee to meet and discuss what that question and answer set should be.
Okay. So is that something you'll let me know later,
Yes,
or we'll determine it today, I guess?
we'll determine to get to today, and if it's needed, then I will certainly set it all up, and we'll find a date and do all that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then moving on to E, report from the Rules Committee, Mr. Francis.
We have not met, but my assumption is that we probably should meet based on the rules. So if we can go through very quickly the same exercise and identify a time that would be wonderful. Ms. Fassel, can I ask that you call out the members, please, of the Rules Committee to make sure that we have the appropriate parties?
The Rules Committee include Mr. Francis, Dr. Elder, Mrs. Hudson Thompson, Chaplain Stoglin, and backups are Mr. Parrish and Reverend Dr. Scullman.
Okay, let me pull up a calendar here. And how is December 13th?
Monday, December 13th.
Yes, how does that work for folks?
Name the time between 8 and 3.
Between 8 and 3, how about 10:30?
Yeah,
I won't be available.
Okay, later or earlier? Let's you want to go with
Mon-
11:30?
Mondays are, if it's a short meeting, I can do it at 11:30.
I was thinking 1 hour, 11:30 to 12:30 then?
I can do that.
This is 11:30 to 12:30, 13th December, and this is which committee?
The Rules Committee?
Raw. And that was 11:30 to 12:30, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Does that work for you, Dr. Stoglin?
That's good. That's good to go. On
Okay,
time, on target.
that sounds wonderful. I think we have a date and time then. If I could be so bold as to ask you, Ms. Fassel, if you can send out an invite for that one, please.
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then let's move on to agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action regarding the jurisprudence exam. So A, discussion and possible action concerning the quarterly summary. Is there any discussion over the quarterly summary? Yes, Dr. Elder.
okay, so in reading the comments from the licensees who took the exam, I'm pleased to see that many people who say I'm a transfer from out of state felt that the exam was very helpful to them to acquaint them with the Texas rules and laws. I am so appreciative of that feedback because that is partly what it's designed to do. And so I'm glad that it is absolutely working in that way. I am concerned about the continued volume of complaints we get about the amount of questions that focus on BHEC. And I did go back and I looked at our June 2021 meeting minutes of the Licensing Standard Committee. In that committee, we discussed, like, what do we do about this? Because people obviously don't like it, but we felt at the time that keeping those BHEC questions was very important, especially in the first year, so that licensees get acquainted with the BHEC, the new BHEC structure and how the member boards fit into that. In that meeting, we discussed recommending that we keep those BHEC questions only through the fourth quarter of this year to ensure that there's a full year of those questions, and that we then revise the exam possibly after that to remove, maybe just reduce the quantity of those questions. And or the other option would be to limit the amount of BHEC questions that are pulled as part of the 40 random questions. And so I'm just curious where we're at with those recommendations.
So as I recall, that was up for discussion, but I didn't understand that that was a Sarah at this time do this. I was under the impression that it was up for discussion at the previous meeting, but not that I was instructed to pull the trigger. So
Sure.
certainly, I'm checking my notes. So when I looked at the structure of the jurisprudence exam, there's 65 total questions, 25 are mandatory questions. So as you'll recall, there's a total of 295 questions that are available. When someone logs in to take the exam, it pulls a random selection of those 295, except for the 25 that are mandatory. So those 25 come up every time for every examinee. 6 of those are specifically on the council structure. and 19 of those are related to the frequently found rule violations. So I may recommend at this point for your consideration that we remove the six questions regarding the council structure from the mandatory pool. They may still be selected as random, but they wouldn't be on every exam. They would just be how they pull up randomly. I can check if you'd like how many overall questions are about the BHEC structure. But to my recollection, well, I don't even know. It does cover chapter 507, which is mostly the council's, that's the council's enabling statute. It includes chapter 502, which is the board's enabling statute. And then it includes chapters 881 through 885 of the administrative code and chapter 801 of the administrative code. So it may seem to people like this is all BHEC, but bear in mind that if you're a marriage and family therapist, all of those chapters apply to your license.
I wonder if it'd be better actually to do it the other way, where instead we pick out maybe the 6 questions we want them to know about BHEC and leave those in the mandatory, and then get rid of all the random ones from the rest of the data bank, from the question bank. So that way we're.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea, because then we can have the BHEC structure questions in there, but then focus the rest of it on the practice of marriage and family therapy. But I think Ms. Fasholtz is making a very good point. They still need to know the BHEC rules that apply to the way that they run their practice. So I think what I keep hearing is it's too much about BHEC structure. I don't care how long a BHEC person has to serve on the board. I mean, they really, which I think is great, they want to focus on the meat and potatoes of what they practice. So I don't know how we could facilitate that, but if that looks like a great idea to me.
If I could, I think I agree with you, Sarah, that we did never discuss any time limit about when the question is what quarter. I think on one hand, remember that we are here to protect the citizens of the great state of Texas. And it's like, well, the students don't read the book. Well, you're the professor who has the doctorate or whatever. You're going to say, well, gosh, they want to read funny papers instead of reading the novel on Charles Dickens. So you have to be mindful of that, I think. And the other is, it's good for people, particularly those who come from other states, to know that although it's an oxymoron, as it were, that the great state of Texas actually has a comprehensive mental health executive council where these 4 major mental health providing communities are talking to each other through BHEC. And I think it's important for the persons who are coming into this state or living within the state to understand the importance of BHEC and what the procedures are. I don't think that 6 questions is that overwhelming. So I think we have to consider and balance all of that before we say it's a bit too much questioning. And I don't think anybody is there to just ask about BHEC when you have 6 out of 65 questions. So I think we have to keep a balanced perspective on that, and that sometimes change has to occur. And this is one of those changes that people have worked very hard and continue to do while they serve as BHEC representatives. So I think Chairman Merchant, I think your suggestion is quite on point. You have the 6 questions, and then whatever the random questions are, we can discuss that maybe later. And I think Ms. Smith's point about the overlapping from one committee to the other, this may be a discussion that we can talk about, others can talk about within the committee and make suggestions and maybe put it on the agenda for a later date so we can have more data and more input. That would be my perspective. I'll yield.
To kind of piggyback on what Chaplain Stalvin said, I'm going to have a real hard time getting behind taking a whole lot of BHEC questions away. This is not a difficult test. You keep clicking until it gives you the right answer. So if it was, you have to study a huge amount, oh my God, if you don't pass it, then it's not that kind of a test. So I'm gonna have a real hard time with taking away very many of these questions. If we want to cherry pick them and make sure that everybody always knows the information that they want to have every single time, that's great. But taking a whole lot of them, we don't have half of the questions over BHEC or even close to that. So I'm gonna push back a little bit of the complaints because this structured test is a knowledge test. And as you fail it, you gain the knowledge in learning what is the right answer. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there on this process. Sorry for anyone that's listening that hates it and thinks that it's too many BHEC questions. Sorry.
No, and I wanna piggyback on that, Janine, that my impression in reading the comments and also just in taking it is it's not going to be a mini licensing exam that has to do with everything you want to know about MFT, and that's exclusive. Possibly what we could do is in the preamble, and I don't recall what the preamble is with this, is that we say, you know, the jurisprudence exam is going to cover these components of what's going on with BHEC and understanding the structure. There will be some questions about ethical situations. There will be some questions regarding this and whatever it is, to kind of get the mindset of the licensee who's taken the test to say, okay, this is not just going to be completely, you know, MFT centric like the licensing exam. It is going to cover aspects of owning, retaining, maintaining, understanding all of the components of being a licensed marriage and family therapist and all the different things that go along with that. So possibly we could kind of get their mind moving into that direction so that when they take it, the expectations are a little bit more realistic. As reading through the comments, I think there was possibly a misunderstanding as to the purpose actually of what they would be doing for the jurisprudence exam. Even though we know what that is, they may not, and we might not. We might could do a better job on the front end explaining what to expect from taking this. And I also let's leave some BHEC in there, significant BHEC that we need, because this is what we do. This is who we are, and it's important, especially from people from out of state, to understand the structuring that we have for BHEC and for licensing.
Here. I like that suggestion, Russ, of building it more on the front end explanation to have expectations be met. That was a great suggestion.
So I agree that I think we do need something. I do think that licensees need to be familiar with the structure of BHEC. But how many of y'all have been able to actually read through all the question banks? Has anybody been able to do that? Okay. I would encourage, I think probably what I would like is maybe for the professional development committee to actually read through the questions on the question bank that pertain to BHEC and figure out maybe which are the ones that they feel like licensees most need to know, which ones are maybe like, I don't know, random details that maybe aren't as important. And maybe just kind of sift through some of these questions and make a decision about which ones we feel like are essential, which ones maybe would make good random questions, and which ones we just can mix all together. Does that make sense? How do y'all feel about that?
I like that idea, Dr. Merchant. I also want us to keep in mind that as rules change and as BHEC changes, we have the core that is not probably going to change, but we need to build in the buffer, because if we decide these aren't as important and we take them out, it's harder to put it back in. So leaving a buffer when you guys look at this, this buffer zone of questions are questions that we can modify a lot. So we have the same number we're looking at, but instead of just saying, okay, this is all we need them to know, and we don't ever have to worry about, and we'll get rid of everything else, we need to look at, this is what we need them to know, and we need this much buffer that can be always interchangeable. Does that make sense?
Okay. So professional development committee, are y'all willing to take up that task of sifting through those questions and deciding which ones are essential, which ones will be random, and which ones we can maybe mix?
Yes.
Y'all want to go ahead and schedule a meeting?
Good. So we will be meeting. Yay.
All right.
And Chair Husband Thompson, when you guys look at this, would you also reach out to Daryl to get the differentiating between the boards. Psychologists only take their ethics, their jurisprudence once. The other boards sometimes take it yearly, take it every renewal period. But would you double check on how many the other boards also have in theirs as well? Because that's what they're
Sure.
going to ask me on the standardization committee. So
Okay,
would you mind to reach out? Thank you very much.
absolutely. Sarah, do you want me to set the meeting today or can we do this via email later?
Your preference.
I'd rather do it email later, please.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
And for clarification, Ms. Smith, if this is information you want to take back to the standardization committee, does professional development need to aim for meeting before November 15th?
No, no, we won't be getting, we're not in that fight yet.
Okay.
Okay, is there any further discussion on agenda item number 11 regarding the jurisprudence exam?
This is Dr. Elder. I had a question on, the board administrator's report about frequent violations. And I think this is fabulous information as a stakeholder. When I was TCA's liaison, this is what we were asking for so that we can move this through the chain of information to stakeholders and licensees. So we can say, be careful, here's how your fellow licensees are messing up. So as someone who is about to present at a professional conference, I wanted to ask permission to include any of this information about frequent violations in the presentation. Is that appropriate?
It's already in it.
Okay, I think it's such great information. Thank you for working through all of the prior violations and compiling this information.
Hey, Dr. Elder, I just want to write it down. Who is the TCA liaison to the social work board? Like you were to the LMFT board for a long time. Who is it to the social work board?
TCA does not appoint a liaison to the social work board, only MFT and LPC.
Oh, is there a reason for that?
There are not members of TCA who are social workers. They belong to the social work organization, not TCA.
And the only other thing that I want to say about agenda item number 11 is that I know one of the other kind of requests in the comments was just about more vignette style questions. And I know that I have lots of experience writing vignette style questions for my work, and I'm assuming that Dr. Barty and Dr. Elder do too. And so if the professional development committee would like any assistance, I know that I'm willing to offer. I'm happy to help y'all write vignette style questions if y'all decide to take up that task, just FYI.
Thank you, Dr. Merchant. I would respond with, when we discussed previously possible vignette type questions, that was discouraged by attorneys because they can be so nuanced that it can be hard to answer those kinds of questions. And so we did not consider adding to the vignette style like application-based questions because of that reason.
Okay, any other discussion on 11? Okay, then let's move on to number 12, discussion and possible action concerning the Texas Association of Psychological Associates request to change the title of Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist Associate. I'm trust that you all had opportunity to read their letter, which was actually addressed to the LPC board. So I guess I'm just going to open the floor for discussion. So who would like to begin?
So if I may, the MFT board need not take action on this today. Mostly this was for your information. The title of Marriage and Family Therapist Associate is in your statute. So
Does that mean that we couldn't change it if we wanted to, even if we did want to?
I'll leave that to the attorney, but it might be confusing if you did.
Yeah, you can certainly discuss that if you would like to consider it, but I would not recommend changing the title because, as echoing what Ms. Fassel said, is it's statutory. It specifically says LMFT associate, and there is on page 2 they kind of have a footnote where on TAPA's letter where it does deal mainly about LPC associates, but it does also make mention of LMFT associates, and they would like for those to change. But again, it's in the statute. It's specifically named that in the statute. I would not recommend taking any action on it, but we wanted to inform you about TAPA's letter, so that's why it's included in the board packet.
Sir, Dr. Elder?
I would just like to inquire, because I guess I haven't been around long enough to know the history about the choice, the initial choice that was made to use the word associate versus intern. I'm curious what prompted that decision.
Dr. Eller, are you talking about LPC associates or LMFT associates, or?
Well, both. I mean, I know LMFT associate's been around forever, but I know that there's been a recent push to change LPC intern to associate. And I'm curious about what is behind that push of choosing that term over intern, which matches that you're in your internship.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Sarah.
I don't know the history, but the longstanding difference between an LPC formerly called an intern versus an LMFT associate was that the LMFT associate was allowed to establish a private practice, whereas the LPC intern could not own their own practice. I believe there's been some discussion on that point. I don't know where it is at this time. So that might have been, just speculating, that might have been part of the discussion when the statutes were written way back as to what to call the person who is under supervised experience before they get their full LMFT or their full LPC license.
I know that I'm not having worked with the LPC board for very long. I don't necessarily know that I know all of the history behind the change, but I do know that I think it was a stakeholder request where they requested a change from LPC intern to LPC associate. My general understanding is in many of the other professions, whether it's psychology or professional counseling or marriage and family therapy, intern is typically a term used, especially mentioned in the statute, for somebody that's in a master's or doctoral degree, some sort of graduate degree program, and they're doing some sort of supervised experience. And so I believe the thinking was once they got out of that, intern had some sort of reference to they're actually in a school program. They're no longer, they've graduated, they're postgraduate, and so they're getting some sort of supervised experience. So calling them an intern was kind of a misnomer, and calling them an associate might be more appropriate to describe, where they are in their professional career. So because there's psychological interns, and those are specifically in the statute, they're in a degree program, and then licensed psychological associates is an actual license that used to only be under supervision, but now after 3,000 hours, they can get independent practice. So, but going back to the LPC board, I think there was in their history, I think there was a stakeholder input, and they had requested the change, and that was something that the board agreed to change the terminology from LPC intern to LPC associate.
Having served on the board when that request came in, it was a stakeholder request, and my limited understanding behind the request for the change is if we're called associates instead of interns, then we'll be more likely to possibly get reimbursed by third-party payers for our services. And we'll be more likely to be able to be in private practice because that term indicates we can be in practice, because that was the next move. Change our name and now give us private practice. So I think that was kind of the impetus behind it. I was just curious about the history of choosing LMFT associate, and Ms. Fazholtz, I really appreciate that distinction. That makes sense about being in private practice, whereas LPC interns could not at the time be in private practice, which is also about to change.
Okay, is there any further discussion about this request from Papa? Okay, Then we are going to move on to number 13, which is report from the board chair. I didn't really have a whole lot to report. I will say that I did go to the AMFTRB meeting back in September. It was a very good meeting, learned lots of new things. So just kind of a quick update about that. One is the AMFTRB has released some telehealth update. Several years ago, they put together a committee and they made some recommendations or guidelines as far as telehealth. They have since updated their guidelines, and I would actually like the rules committee to look through their update and make sure, or just kind of do a comparison of kind of their rules and our rules. I feel like in my reading of it, that it is that our rules and their guidelines mesh pretty well. But I would just like for the rules committee to kind of look through and see if there are any changes that maybe we should be making or should be considering to our telehealth rules based on the recommendations of AMFTRB. Jennifer Smotherman served as the chair of the committee that looked at the telehealth guidelines. And so I would even encourage the rules committee to maybe connect with Ms. Smotherman over that. One of the other kind of interesting things, and that's maybe possibly slightly different from our rules and the AMFTRB recommendations, is AMFTRB defines telehealth as being either synchronous or asynchronous. And so that might be something that we want to think about. And I don't know, just how do we want to define telehealth? Is it only synchronous? Can it be either? And just maybe I would encourage maybe the rules committee to look through just some of those definitions and some of those guidelines. Thoughts, questions about that? Janine?
Yeah. Chair Merchant, I appreciate you having the rules committee do that. I just want to kind of, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but this is a topic that's come up in the BHEC standardization committee that I'm on, and that I am fighting for us to keep this as part of our CEUs. No other license requires this. I think it's vital for us. I think we had an edge when COVID hit. Obviously, telehealth is not going to go away. And so I have said, I had my big throwdown in that meeting to keep this as part of our CEU package, a requirement for us. And since I haven't gotten any feedback, I want to make sure, is this something you guys want me to die on the hill? Because I think it's important, but I don't want to speak for the just a thumb up if you guys want me to continue to push. This is a definite for us. We are not giving this up for standardization.
Thank you for representing us. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, I appreciate you dying on that hill, Ms. Smith, because I feel strongly that that should be a part of our CEU package. So.
Same. I reached out to Ms. Smotherman, and she and I had a long talk about this and why, and she gave me a lot of good references for it. So I have passed that along, and it is now in the revised thing that I will send to the other people on our licensing standards to look over for our the new recommendation. Okay.
Any other comment about about the technology assisted services? Any other comment about that before I move on? Okay. The other things that came out of the AMFTRB meeting was, I believe we've talked in here about the Burkamp versus Washington, D.C. case that's coming out. Basically, Ms. Burkamp is filed a civil suit alleging that the rule that she cannot practice across state lines violates her First Amendment right to free speech. Since therapy is the quote is conversations consisting of nothing more than speech. I don't know, I kind of beg to differ. I think that therapy is much more than just a conversation, but anyways, so she has filed that complaint, and AMFTRB is waiting to file an amicus brief. They're going to see if the case is going to be dismissed before moving on. If the case is not dismissed, then AMFTRB will probably file an amicus brief in this instance. So anyways, it'll be interesting to see kind of what comes out of this case. Any questions there? Okay. Next thing they mentioned very briefly in the AMFTRB meeting is that HIPAA is about to release new guidelines regarding texting and social media and those kinds of things. And so I scoured the internet looking for any kind of evidence of this, and I could not find anything. So I don't know, maybe other people can scour better than I can, or maybe we just have to simply wait until HIPAA releases whatever this new rule or guideline is. But that is something, especially as we're thinking about telehealth, that maybe we need to be keeping an eye towards, is that HIPAA could possibly be coming out with some new guidelines regarding social media contact, texting, all that kind of fun stuff. Let's see here, other AMFTRB updates. Let's see here. They have looked into remote proctoring for the AMFTRB exam because of COVID, and they just could not find a way to make that work. So presently, they are not going to be doing any remote proctoring. They are back to doing the 1 week test windows. So because of COVID, they had kind of expanded their test window to make sure that everybody could test. But they have since gone back to having that little 1 week window kind of at the end of the month, and then with results being released 20 days later. They did note that they had an increase, I thought this was interesting, an increase in accommodations due to generalized anxiety disorder, which they do believe is related kind of to COVID and the pandemic. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They also completed their role delineation survey, and they have made some changes, adjusted some weighting due to that role delineation survey. And I really appreciate the new roadmap that they included on the website, because I get questions routinely, like probably at least one a month, from somebody going, I didn't pass the exam, how do I get a new code? And so it'll be really nice to be able to just refer them to that roadmap and let them know that they don't actually have to get another code. They just recontact the provider and can sign up for that test again. So anyways, the only other thing that came out of AMFTRB was that they have released some new recommendations on reexamination. One of their recommendations was that applicants wait 12 months after failing the third time, and that they have to have a study plan. We do have a study plan. VHEC requires that if you failed 3 times, you have a study plan that has to be approved by the board. But applicants do not have to wait the 12 months. So
Did they give a rationale for waiting 12 months?
They did not give a rationale for waiting 12 months. And I'm not sure, because I was kind of curious about that too, about what that rationale was. They just want to make sure that applicants, my guess, I'm just guessing, I don't know, is that because it's a practice exam, maybe they want to make sure that the applicant has more time in the field before they take the exam. However, in some places like Texas, that doesn't really work, because you can't practice without a license. And so that might be helpful maybe in another state where you can practice before you take the exam, but in Texas where you have to take the exam first before you can practice, I don't know that waiting 12 months makes sense for us. So
Dr. Merchant, I wanted to ask, in reading through their new resolution and their rules that they passed, are we as users of that exam bound to follow those guidelines, or are we free to have our own rules separate from that?
They will, again, somebody else could probably weigh on this who probably knows more about this than I do, but essentially they allow our students to do it without waiting the 12 months because you can get a waiver, and so, is that right, Sarah?
I've had a recent conversation on the social work side with their exam vendor, their association, and there was talk about if we don't conform exactly to their bylaws, then a waiver needs to be in place.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really explored that particularly with AMFTRB and the MFT board.
Yeah, I mean,
I can look into it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, but I mean, they have approved our students to take. We've not run into an issue with it. I'll just say that we've not run into an issue. But and part of that recommendation was that the executive director can issue a waiver if it's not consistent with state rules. So, okay, any other questions, comments about AMFTRB, any of the materials that were given to you? Ms. Smith?
Yes, Chair Merchant, not about the materials, but was there discussion concerning compacts across states?
Yeah, very briefly. There were, there was very briefly. There was not like a big, long conversation. There were a couple of states that were interested, would be open to compacts. Ohio was one, and I can't remember what the other one was. I have it written down somewhere, but it was more like in passing. It was not a full conversation. We did kind of give a little like, how do y'all handle mobility? And I spoke a little bit about how Texas handles mobility, but that was the extent of the conversation.
So I would like for our board to begin to look at that as a dialogue, because for dual licenses, LPC and LMFTs, the LPC board is looking into what compacts would look like. The psychology board is very far ahead in passing some compact things. So I don't want our licenses to be at a disadvantage on this front. So I would like for us to kind of have that in the horizon for us. And I don't know if it's rules needs to look at that, or we just need to be talking with other states. I'm not really sure the next step on that, but yes. Yes, Patrick.
I mean, I'll let you know. So how the psychology board became a part of SIPAC, which is the interstate compact, is legislation had to be passed. So the legislature has to actually pass some statutory language. And so draft model language that every single state will basically mirror in their statutes to adopt to then join the compact will have to be enacted by each member state. So, there's not anything that we can do rules wise to join a compact, but
no, I knew that, and I knew that this. I know that this is a legislative fix. However, if this is something that our
Janine, is it just me or is it
are going
Janine's
to
audio breaking up?
end up requesting, wanting,
Janine,
then I want to, I want to, yeah, no, I've frozen. Am
Your
I
audio's-
unfrozen? No, not.
your audio's breaking up. You might want to stop your video for a second.
Can you hear
So
me
that
yet? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you might want to
Am
stop
I
your video
unfrozen?
for a second so that you have enough bandwidth that we can understand you, and then come back on video after you speak. That'll create more bandwidth for you.
Yeah, I'm definitely frozen because I have stopped my video.
Your audio is better.
Okay.
You might need,
All right,
You're not-
perfect.
Clint is recommending that you leave and come back.
I will, yeah, I have on mine.
Janine, can you hear us okay?
Zoom.
Are you still with us, Janine? Okay, do you want us, Clint, what do you want us to do? Oh. No, she says she's here and she can hear us.
She's been back out, rejoin.
Okay, Clint is recommending that you back out, Janine, and then rejoin the meeting. And we'll just
to speak, yeah, we'll wait till she comes back in.
While we're waiting, I'll go ahead and echo a word of encouragement to not be too left behind in this process. That if there are others that are already plowing ahead, I would like for us to also step up our awareness and strategies to consider doing that. I know the SIPAC is a big deal, and a lot of people are pointing at that and said, well, there it is. I mean, it's there. And we go, yeah, but it's not here yet. And LPCs are already taking that and running with it. And I don't want us sitting on the bench watching everybody else out there doing that. I'd like for us to kind of, coach, call us in, because I'd like for us to ramp that up. So whatever that takes, whatever the process is, and I don't think we have to reinvent. I mean, we can probably pull a whole bunch from SIPAC. We can kind of see what's going on with LPC and see what we might need to do to kind of modify all of that for the MFT license.
I think that the Council of State Governments has some great compacts that we could look at. And I've had conversations in the past with a connection who Jennifer Smotherman made for me about the compact. And so I have a draft that I could just send out and say, hey, here's an option for us. I mean, I know we can't pass the legislation, we can't create a rule, but we could look at the draft compact and say, hey, I think this would work, or tweak this for MFTs in our practice. And at least, like you said, Dr. Barteen, not reinvent the wheel, but also have a draft to begin with so that we could create some language. And then I think it would be that we have to get some stakeholders on board who are willing to lead this push. And that might be TAMFT for, TCA. They've been very active with the LPC compact. And so I'm wondering if TAMFT could get on board with supporting an MFT compact.
So for the social work board, the Department of Defense and the Council of State Governments partnered and called for other organizations regarding social work to join. And the Association of Social Work Boards, who is the vendor for the national exam for social work, was one of those selected among others, as well as their national association. And what the social work board did earlier this year was they voted to authorize Daryl Spinks, executive director for the council, to further the compact on their behalf as input was needed. And Daryl volunteered to be a member of the technical assistance group or committee. So he was there, he met with them in early October to be a stakeholder in that group and provide information, be a resource type of witness. And then I can provide after this meeting, there's a long process of, after the technical group irons out some of the details, then there's a documentation group that writes the draft legislation. It gets passed around for comment, similar to our rules, for a public comment, gets revised, and then is presented with an awareness and education campaign to the states for their legislators' review and enactment. I can send that material to this board if you want to see what that basic process was under the Council of State Governments. I'm not sure how the LPC compact, I don't know if they went through this similar process with the Council of State Governments. But if you'd like to see how that went, that would be, I can send that. And if you'd like to vote to authorize Daryl to act on your behalf.
Well, I think we already did.
Did
Remember
you?
back in January, Daryl came to us and asked if we would be interested in pursuing compacts, and we all consented and said yes.
Okay.
So I think that we've already made that. I think we've already voted in that direction. I wish Daryl was here so he could maybe weigh in on if there's any kind of headway in that, but we have already indicated to him that we would be interested in pursuing a compact if that opportunity arose.
Okay.
Chair Merchant, would this, is there a committee that could start doing a little bit of legwork with all of this?
Chair Merchant, just excuse me just a minute. Daryl is jumping on the meeting.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's wait until Daryl jumps on and maybe we can hear what he has to say. I don't know that it would be a committee per se. It might be just kind of asking Daryl and or staff to maybe reach out. I don't know. Let's hear what Daryl has to say and then we can go from there.
Ms. Smith, was there anything you wanted to repeat? If your audio is back?
If you guys can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
No.
Or you froze again?
Daryl, do you want to jump in on this conversation about compacts?
Bring me up to speed. What? We're
Um,
talking about the social work compact, where we're at in that.
I guess just that the board wants to make it known that we are interested and we would be interested in pursuing a compact with another state or states. You had mentioned, you had come to us in January and asked us if we would be interested, and we consented and said, yes, we would be. And so I guess we're just wondering if there is any forward movement, or are there things the board can be doing to push this forward? Like, I guess, what could we do to further this goal?
Okay. SIPAC and the social work compact and the counseling compact, they all evolved differently, originated from different sources. SIPAC started with ASPPB, which is the body of all the psychology regulatory boards in the US and Canada. Whereas social work and counseling originated with DOD, and they used, I think, the Council of State Governments to then develop it. So it arose out of the Department of Defense. Their desire to have mobility among military spouses is really what drove it. That's what's pushing them. As I haven't heard anything on a marriage and family therapy compact, either from AMF TRB or from DOD. So in order to, and it's such an expensive ball to get rolling. It's going to take one of those big entities. I suspect DOD is probably going to be the better route to go because of the money issue. I don't know what AMF TRB's budget looks like, but I know it's always better if you can get the feds to bankroll it. Then they generally will pitch it over to, I think, the Council of State Governments. So how we get that ball rolling, I don't know. I would have to visit. I've never asked how that ball got rolling over at DOD. I know the guy that got it rolling. I guess I could visit with him when I get a chance and see what we can do there. Have y'all are going to be more knowledgeable about what's the temperature of other jurisdictions in the country? And I'm assuming, well, we wouldn't need Canada. We couldn't do Canada, but I mean, have y'all heard other chatter among other jurisdictions that they're interested in doing something like that?
When at the AMFTRB meeting, there were a couple of states, Ohio, and I think it was Massachusetts, that mentioned that they would be open and interested in a compact. It's my understanding they're kind of expensive. And actually, we have Jennifer Smotherman is on the call. And she is actually our rep with AMFTRB. And so she would probably have more information about this. So I'm going to, Sarah, can we pull Jennifer in to comment?
Ms. Smotherman?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you. I am currently serving as the president-elect of AMFTRB, and I'm also on the mobility committee. And so I can give you a little bit more information if you'd like about where we are with this. Okay, we did attend the meeting that the Council of State Governments and the Department of Defense put together. AMFTRB was in that meeting at that table. And at that time, we determined that it was not in the best interest of our stakeholders, thinking about all of the states, all 50 states, for AMFTRB to try to take the lead on a compact. A compact costs several $1 million on the front end, and then it costs quite a lot on the annual. My understanding is there are annual expenses that go in. And you guys have to remember, while Texas has a vibrant population of MFTs, there are lots of other states that only have a handful. And so with that in mind, we began to think about, we've been studying mobility, we've been talking about mobility for a long, long time, and licensure portability, okay, which is what a compact is all about. And so we were thinking about what is in the best interest of serving all of our member boards. And that is for us to really study hard and work with states on licensure portability. So there are a couple models, and there actually was, at least I don't know if you remember the CLEAR session that I did the update on in the AMFTRB meeting, and I would love if we could get that out to all of you. But there's a model in Canada. It's interesting, Daryl, that you talked about Canada. They really have more of a common standards, open licensure kind of model, not compacts, and that doesn't cost the state anything. And then we also have looked at Arizona and their licensing rules and laws, and we've looked at the current legislation that just went through in Colorado, and you can look at DORA, their Department of Regulation. And basically what that is it's just fast track to licensure. If you're licensed in good standing in one state, then the encouragement to the other states is to go ahead and say, you are licensed there and you have no complaints against you. You're going to be able to quickly get licensed here via endorsement. And I will tell you personally, having gone through that Colorado process, I was licensed the next day by endorsement. Within hours, my Texas license was endorsed and I was able to get licensed in Colorado. Now, one thing that they do that Texas doesn't do is we didn't have to go and get a form from the Texas board and wait for Texas, for BHEC to do that form and send it over to DORA. All they had to do is look online and see that my license was verified and in good standing. They checked what we have online, and that verification was sufficient. And so as MFTs, basically, in a nutshell, we're looking more at promoting that kind of a model than spending millions of dollars on the front end and several thousands of dollars every year for small boards, or even boards, even MFTs that don't have a dedicated board to have to be a part of that compact. So that's where we are on that. Now, if there was another organization that wanted to take the lead on the compact, let's say AAMFT or TAMFT or this board or whoever, AMFTRB would not stand in opposition at all. We actually feel like it's very possible that there could be a compact model and a portability model that could be supported at the same time. So that's where we are on all of that. And I would encourage this board to really look at what Colorado has done in their legislation and in their process, because it really does support portability. And I think, you guys know I care very much about public protection. I think it still upholds public protection at the same time.
Jennifer,
thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for speaking. I just have one question, then I'll turn over to Ms. Smith and then Mr. Spinks. Jennifer, will AMFTRB, after they're kind of done with all of this, be kind of issuing some sort of guideline or recommendation, kind of like they've done with telehealth?
I think that they will. So remember, we had a 5-year mobility rule, and then we recently changed that to 1 renewal period. We are continuing to study mobility, and I think that you will see maybe a change in that guideline coming up. I'm hoping in the next year or two, you're going to see a change in that recommendation that would support the ideas that we're talking about, especially now that we can study public protection in Canada, Arizona, Colorado, and a handful of other states that are already using a model like this.
Okay, I'm going to be looking forward to those recommendations. Ms. Smith would like to know, she typed her question. Ms. Smith would like to know if that applies to supervisor status as well. Like, since you're a supervisor here, whenever you applied in Colorado, did you get supervisor status there as well?
I don't think that did. I don't think that I would have to go and look. That's terrible that I don't know that answer, but I don't think that I am a Colorado supervisor. I do think that I would still have to go through their supervisor process, which makes sense in terms of understanding their rules. Although their jurisprudence exam is very, very different than ours. It's not a learning experience. It is very much an exam where you have to know there's about 800 pages of statutes and rules. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
What kind of timeline do you think we would be looking at in terms of AMFTRB being able to issue some sort of guideline or recommendation? I ask because I guess I'm curious if this mobility issue is something that I should encourage the board to take up now, or if we should give AMFTRB a little bit more time to develop some recommendations and maybe take this up in 6 months or a year.
I know that it's something that we will continue to meet about this year, and it is on our agenda to put the mobility committee back to work this year. And so I think that usually things in AMFTRB happen over that 1-year cycle from one annual, because, you know, our members are not together to vote on things except for one time. And so I think that we would be looking at maybe a vote coming out potentially in the next annual meeting next September. I would absolutely encourage this board to continue to look at mobility, look at portability. That is a very, very important topic in regulation. And that's one of the criticisms of regulation. And I think that this board needs to have a firm policy and know what and why you're doing with portability.
Mr. Spinks, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off what Jennifer mentioned. We actually would have had something very similar, if not exactly like what Colorado has. House Bill 3626 in the last legislative session. That would have created the inroad, the fast track for folks who are licensed in another jurisdiction to become licensed almost immediately here in Texas. It would have functioned just like what Jennifer said her experience was in Colorado. So, but we lost that when that bill didn't make it out of the Senate. It made it out of the House, but it died in the Senate. So that's still an option, but you know, whether we go that kind of route or the compact route, either way requires a legislative fix. So this is something that TAMFT is going to have to get on board with and carry the water on. Now they carried the water on House Bill 3626, them and TCA. And I think the Social Work Board, TPA, was the only one that didn't get on board with that. Psychology already has something similar. Psychology, it's not as good as what I say the word good, that's me adding that adjective, but in my opinion, it's not as good as what y'all would have had under 3626 because psych requires you to have 5 years of practice experience, whereas you're in immediately if you're licensed in another jurisdiction and then you come here under House Bill 3626, you would have been in. So there's that problem there. The one thing that, you know, people often say, well, if we do this, then why do we need a compact? One thing you got to think about is these are one-way streets in. They don't allow our folks to then go out and practice in other compact member states. So that's one advantage to having a compact is once you are part of that, it's free movement within that compact. And those things will invariably grow once people become attracted to them. So just keep that in mind. And they're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to pick one over the other. You can go with both.
Right.
Florida, that's something that I know psychology is pushing in Florida because Florida has a mechanism like what Jennifer was talking about, where it's easy to come in and they're dealing with that argument ASPPB is down there about, well, why do we even need it? Well, if you're a Floridian and you want to go out, you don't have that same luxury. It's just easy to come in. So those are trade-offs to keep in mind. But I'll tell you another thing that you run into, and I see it all the time in the SIPAC stuff, is the small jurisdictions with small licensee populations. It's going to be difficult. It's difficult to convince them to join compacts because then they lose that revenue. People are not applying and people are not renewing a license with them. So you've got a financial thing there. I'll just say this, and I'm going to be very candid and blunt with that. I understand that argument, but I also think that places the agency over the population, which we are charged with regulating the providers of healthcare to. In other words, you're not putting the citizen first, which is what I'm supposed to do. You're actually putting the agency first by saying, well, it's going to impact our budget. You know, if it helps my grandma get the help she needs, you know, wherever, then screw the budget is kind of my philosophy on it. I mean, that's what, you know, that's my personal philosophy, but you're going to see that tug of war play out in compact discussions. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Mr. Spinks,
Yes, sir.
There are two questions in the window for you. Who was able to file that original bill, and who was the sponsor of that bill?
House Representative Romero, I think he's out of Fort Worth. He carried the bill on the House side and got it through the House. And then Senator Zaffarini had it over on the Senate side. It died in the Senate, not because anybody hated it or didn't like it. I think it was pretty well liked across. It was not a D or an R issue, and everybody seemed to like it. But it fell victim to that tussling between the House and the Senate, where the House was accusing the Senate of not advancing bills, and the Senate was like, yeah, we are. And then they got into this fuss and match, and it fell victim to that again. So that's what killed it. It wasn't anything with the bill, I don't think.
Daryl, going back to kind of, like Jennifer had mentioned that here in Texas, people have to fill out a form and then we contact, I assume, the other board. Is there a way for staff to do it the way that, Jennifer's talking about, where staff just goes online, verifies the license? Like,
Yeah,
is that
yeah,
possible?
we are actually moving towards that. In fact, I've already told staff that I don't really care if we have a verification form. If you can go to that website and verify it, I really don't care if we have the verification form. Now, we haven't, I think there may be some rule cleanup or some application cleanup that we still need to do on that. But from a very practical standpoint, I don't care if it's on a form or if you go to that governmental agency website, it's the same reliability either way. In fact, it's probably better reliability if we use the website.
All right. Good morning, Attorney Spink. Good seeing you. This goes to everyone, particularly Sarah and you. And that is, Madam Chair, I'm going to do Part A, and I'll wait for Part B for the next item. I think it's number 14. So I'll do Part A right here. And that is, of course, Sarah knows what I'm about to say. My concern is that you have other people coming in from the state, and all due respect for what people have said, doctors have to go through the same thing. They can be a medical doctor in California, but they come here, they still have to do, because we don't know who these people are. And then the citizens are going to suffer, and their families, if these people prove to be incompetent. Well, oops, it's not going to make it. And then attorneys have to go through certain things to get bar license. Yeah, you can be great in the great state of Texas, but then they say, well, you come into New York, you got to take the New York bar, right? And so that's why you list they are barred in New York, California, et cetera, in the Supreme Court, because you have to go through different steps in order to match those abilities to practice before or come before these courts. And my concern is, yes, I understand that Texas has, at this point, compared to other states, a plethora of LMFTs and all of that. But then you have people who may come from other states who have less requirements. And now you are now, if this has happened, you're now authorized to come to the great state of Texas, be it portability, be it in person, whichever, and then something happens, the great state of Texas is liable. And the citizens now are the recipients or the victims of these situations. So my concern is, how are you going to regulate? And whether you can answer that today or not is just something to give contemplation to, because I think this is a real deal. And I know people have said a lot of things have happened because of COVID and the variations of that. And now, just like this freeze that we had in the great state of Texas, people said, oh yeah, and they lived out of state, and we had 20 plus citizens of this state to die because of neglect and dereliction of duties. And so now my understanding is that board has Texans only. So here's an example of people with good intentions that went awry, and this state suffered when we had gas, oil, wind, and everything else, but because of dereliction of duties and other people living out of state who had direct action and authority and governance on this state, and it cost this state not only dollars but lives. You understand, I think, the illustration here. So that's my greatest concern for the citizens of the great state of Texas, that you have this with good intentions, and then something happens and it costs not only dollars but potential mental health and lives. And I'll save Part B for our next one, because it involves some other areas that are related. So I'll yield there.
I'll address it. I'll address the compact aspect first. one advantage to the compact over each state using an endorsement method is the compacts have inherent standards built into them, minimum standards. In other words, if you're going to be a member of the compact state, your licensing standards have to meet this minimum set of criteria. So you've got that's one way. I think probably the compacts are better equipped to address the concern that you just talked about, Chaplain Stogland, because you can't be part of the compact if your standards are so low that you're churning out hack jobs that are going to hurt somebody. You're not going to get into the compact unless you change those standards. And compacts can kind of be used as a tool to nudge people or nudge jurisdictions into the general group. They can kind of make people, if people may have standards too high to where you're making it impossible to get in, or very difficult to get in. And you can force those folks to come down where they open up the market sector. So it can be used like that. Now, on the other side, the endorsement method, what you really have to do there in deciding, when you go to decide it, or when trying to decide if you want to go that route, you have to take a very, I think, data-driven approach. You have to look and see what, you're going to have to look at that other jurisdiction and see what kind of disciplinary rates, if we do this and folks are going to come in from this jurisdiction, is that jurisdiction plagued by a particular type of complaint or a particular type of harm? So I think you have to take a very data-driven approach to that and just let the data lead you where it leads you. I mean, you let the cards fall where they may. And if some jurisdiction is letting what Yahoo's in is causing problems, then you need to probably draft it so that you don't want to just specifically say your state stinks, you can't come in, but you can draft it in a way that jurisdictions can be carved out. But you got to be careful there. But and then the flip side to that is you have to use your enforcement hammer for those jurisdictions that, or for practitioners, that you just got to be willing to do it. And there you may have to identify, if you're seeing individuals from a particular jurisdiction engage in a particular type of conduct or cause a particular type of harm, you may have to revisit your schedule of sanctions and say, okay, we let y'all in, we let folks in by endorsement, but here comes the pain now, because y'all are not getting the message, or you up the you change your juris exam. There's another tool you've got at your disposal you can really kind of hone in on. But so you've got some tools. Now, the endorsement side, I mean, candidly, probably your biggest tool is something that happens after the harm occurs, and that is the hammer, rather than the mesh that you vet people through. So, that's about the best I can answer there, Chaplain.
Sarah, your microphone is off.
Sorry, I just want to invite Ms. Featherman has her hand raised, and so Jennifer, you are welcome to unmute.
Thank you. I just want to echo everything that Daryl just said and let you guys know that AMFTRB has been working on this data-driven approach. We've actually been studying complaints across jurisdictions and studying what is the actual rationale and reasoning for each one of these licensing standards that are there. And what I would say is, in general, we've put standards in place. Boards, we did it too, y'all. We put standards in place that were based on what is average across the nation, but was not necessarily based on data. And so AMFTRB is committed, has put funding into these studies on the data-driven approach. And we also have worked on a model schedule of sanctions, and we use the schedule of sanctions that came out of Texas. We did that over 2020. You can find that on the website, and a lot of states have gone and used that and incorporated it into their own schedule of sanctions. And so what I'm saying is I absolutely agree with Daryl, and AMFTRB is absolutely committed to public protection based on what the data is saying that we need for standards. And we're not saying let's just let everyone come in willy-nilly. We're saying let's have some common standards that are based on data.
Okay, with that, Madam Chair and Ms. Smotherman, my question would be, who are the drivers? Will BHEC be in existence? Do we just need to do away with BHEC? Do we need to do away with our LMFT board? I'm using, I know I'm being facetious in a sense, but what would be our role? I mean, we just go away and let AMRT, that board, just say, okay, do this, and whatever the standards are, that's it, and we'll just let them do that. I mean, what is the role of LMFT and then BHEC here? I'll yield.
I mean, I can draw a comparison as to how SIPAC works, and maybe that'll illustrate. It may not necessarily have to work the same way, but I guess that might sort of answer your question as to how all the different agencies work together. Currently with SIPAC, you have to be licensed in a state first, and that's a member of the compact. Then you have to apply with the compact and get authorization to either engage in interstate telepsychology or in-person, temporary in-person psychology. So you have to have both of those components. The other part of it is the compact decides on what minimum standards to meet. And so the example will be to simplify it in Texas, we allow for people that graduated from APA, American Psychological Association accredited degrees to get licensed with us. And we also do a substantial equivalency for it. SIPAC will only take an APA degree. So their standard is different. So not all of our licensees will get into it. So that sort of shows you what that was the standard they decided to meet, to a minimum standard to meet. Everybody had to meet. So it's some would argue it's higher. I don't know that it's higher because it's just because it's someone substantially equivalent doesn't mean it's necessarily lesser. But in order to get your authorization through SIPAC, you have to have, the way they set it up is you have to have no disciplinary history. So if you've ever been disciplined, you're not a candidate to join SIPAC. That's a bit punitive for somebody that maybe had something years and years ago, but that's the way they set it up. So it could be 10 years, 20 years ago, they had a board order, they can't get it. So that.
I just handled one from 08. I sat on the appeals committee for that.
Yeah.
And I had to deny somebody who had been disciplined in 08 for some piddly dink thing. And she can't be in the compact.
Right. And the other part that SIPAC relies on the states to then enforce. So if somebody gets in trouble, the state is going to be the one that's prosecuting it. SIPAC doesn't have its own attorneys to go after people. And what they do is once it reaches, they don't actually have to prove and enter a board order. It has to reach a level of probable cause where I would interpret that to me, it's gone to an ISC, board members looked at it, said, yeah, there's fire to that smoke. This is a violation. You need something to happen to it. That has to be reported to SIPAC, and then SIPAC just yanks it away, and they no longer get that interstate authorization until that either gets resolved and no discipline is entered, or if discipline is entered, it's never coming back. So the standards are far different, but it relies a lot on the states to do the initial licensure and then the enforcement. So the agencies still need to exist based on the SIPAC model. And they still serve a lot of the same functions and roles to investigate and license people. But the standards obviously, are different. And so you have to look at each compact can be set up differently. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
And Chaplain Stockland, I'll add what Patrick said. There is no way any of this can function without the MFT board and without BHEC. It cannot function. Just the mechanisms that are needed to do these things require this board to be in existence and require BHEC to be in existence. Not necessarily BHEC, but at least this board. So if y'all are worried about, voting yourself out of existence, that ain't going to happen. There's just no way that can happen. For that to happen, the legislature would have to cede its entire regulatory authority to a private actor, AMFTRB. That will never happen. I don't care what administration is in office. That is never going to happen. So you can take that one to the bank.
Okay. Well, I think we'll pause this discussion for now. If one of the committees would like to take up mobility, they are welcome to. Or it might be that we wait and see kind of what AMFTRB determines over the course of the next year. And then maybe we can revisit this issue of mobility. I feel like we have made strides towards increasing mobility in Texas, which I'm happy for. And it sounds like there might be more work that we can do. I'm happy to hear that Daryl has already taken the step to kind of streamline the process of not requiring, extraneous paperwork. And so I'll be glad to see where we go from here. So, okay, finishing out my board report. TAMFT is coming up in April. I will be presenting at TAMFT. If anybody would like to present with me, I would love a co-presenter. I don't necessarily have to have one, but if anybody would like to, please just send me an email and let me know, and we can co-present. The application for that is due, I think, the end of November. And so, yes. So the only last thing I have for my board report is again, I'm so happy with the direction that BHEC is going. Thank you so much, Daryl, for just your leadership with BHEC. Thanks to all of our BHEC representatives and just the entire BHEC board. Yes, Daryl, if you need to step out, please step out. So a big thank you to BHEC just for, again, just even looking at like our complaints, looking at how quickly our applications are being processed, like just looking at the progress that BHEC's made over the last year. To me, I'm just absolutely amazed at the progress that has happened. And so just thank you all for your work on that. I also want to, again, thank the attorneys for their work on addressing the complaints and just the speed up of that process and getting those people through. And just, again, thank you so much for how hard you have worked to make that happen. I'd also like to thank Brenda for her work on the consolidated rulebook. She has gone through and taken all of our rules and put them into one document to make it easy for our applicants. And so thank you, Brenda, for your work on the consolidated rulebook. That is all that I have. I do think that we need to take a break. So if y'all want to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes? 5. Oh, 10. Okay, we'll do 10. So let's 10:50. So come back at 11 a.m. Okay.
Ms. Smith, say hello. Are you good to go? Are you construction?
I am hoping so. The reason I wanted to take 10 is I went back in the house, I unplugged the router, I switched some other things. I turned off my computer completely, rebooted everything. So we'll see. It could just be that the legislature heard I was asking about things that are legislatively related and they know what's coming and they're sick of me down there. So I'm saying that that's what it is.
I told you earlier, I had warned you and the rest of the board, it was those attorneys. I keep telling you that and you don't, I don't know. I have to keep, I know. I think,
Catherine, you can't say that. My husband's an attorney. I love him. I think he's great. So
you know, you're used to it. So you're
I'm
used to it. And that's why you're saying what you're saying. I get it. I get it. I'm on board.
I think it's the religious. I think it's the religious right, not really.
Oh, it could be. It could be. We've been blamed for so much. That's
It's
okay.
the lawyers, the religious right, the therapist. Who else can we throw in there?
Well, it's a scapegoat situation. Go ahead. Feel free.
Exactly. And IT. It's IT. It's the IT.
Especially.
Let's not bash them until our meeting's over. So if I may call the roll, Dr. Merchant,
Present.
Dr. Barty,
Present.
excellent. Dr. Elder,
Present.
thank you. Mr. Francis, muted but present. Mrs. Husband Thompson,
Present.
thank you. Mr. Parrish,
Present.
thanks. And Ms. Smith, there she is.
Present.
And Chaplain Stodman,
I am here.
thank you. Dr. Merchant.
Okay, let's move on to item number 14, report from the board's delegates to the Texas Behavioral Executive Council regarding activities of the council. So do we want to begin? I guess, do we have any discussion or
So I'm not a delegate, but I provided in your meeting materials a number of items that I thought would be of interest from the last council meeting. And if the delegates have anything they'd like to add or clarify, or if you have any questions.
Dr. Elder, do you have a question?
I do have several questions about the rules that were made under 14A. So I love that we've adopted the remedy for incomplete licensure requirements. And I'm curious, are we able to push this out as part of our presentation at stakeholder conferences so that people can become aware of this exception?
It's a current adopted rule, so there's nothing wrong with saying that it's a new rule.
It
Okay.
became effective September 19th.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to be sure that we could push that out to stakeholders. I think they'll appreciate that. I also had a question about application to take the licensure exam. I know that the goal of this amendment is to kind of streamline the application process. And my understanding of it is that we are going to allow people to submit their application and get that exam code and then go back and complete their application after so that it's not held up. And I'm seeing that this is a proposed amendment. Can we discuss this yet? Or is this something we need to wait till it's published and, put through public comment? Or can we start to kind of hint this to licensees?
It's currently in the register for public comment. The comment period has not closed yet. So I don't know that it'd be premature to discuss the rule at the board meeting just yet, but you can certainly say this rule is out for, you can point to the Texas Register where it's published. It's publicly available. It went out October 1st. So, and I think it closes, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, the 30th or 31st.
It closes, Patrick, the 31st at 5 p.m.
Okay. And just so if they want to submit comments, they can do that within that time period. And yeah, that's published in the register. They can certainly review those and comment on them. There's nothing wrong with talking about that.
Okay, I think I will definitely, even though it won't be fully adopted, I'm certainly going to include it in our presentation at TCA so we can make people aware of this. I know that in our July 2021 meeting, we talked about creating a step-by-step guide on the website to help applicants understand this new process. And I'm wondering where we're at with that. process.
With the step-by-step guide.
Yes.
So as the rules change, that guide will need to change. So if this rule is adopted, the guide that's posted now will need to be updated. But I don't believe staff has begun to work on an update on a guide based on rules that are not yet adopted. Because depending on public comment, and we can never
Right.
speak for or predict what the board may do.
Okay, I agreed. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that's still on our radar because I want word to get out to our applicants about this. The other question I had is, I was looking at our FAQ section and a concern I had about this particular proposed amendment, which was, I was reassured in our meeting when we discussed it, is that this does not change the ability of applicants to take the exam in their last semester of graduate school. And so I was wondering if we could add in the FAQ, can I take the licensing exam during my last semester of grad school, and an answer with, yeah, and here's how you do it. Can we add that to make sure applicants are aware of that as well?
Yes, I'll make note. And to clarify, I believe the statute and rules say enrolled in or have completed at least an internship course. It does not specify last quarter or last semester.
Thank you for that clarification. That's correct. I think it typically happens at last semester when they're in their last semester of internship, but I think that is an important distinction you're
That would-
making.
That makes sense. They might be more prepared.
Sure, sure. I wanted to ask also about, I'm looking at 884.4 proposed new rule. Maybe I just need some education on this. When I went back and looked at the rules that surround this, 884.3, which is titled Complaints Alleging Violations Related to Court-Ordered Evaluations. The wording of that section is almost the exact same wording as this section regarding court-ordered therapy or parenting facilitator services. And if the goal is to reduce redundancy, is there any way we could combine those so we don't have another whole section that basically repeats the same thing?
I wouldn't necessarily suggest combining them because my 2 cents are there. I'm trying to pull up the rule real quickly, but that particular rule deals with the one that's already adopted deals specifically with forensic evaluations. So it would be court-ordered child custody evaluations or it's non-therapy related essentially. And so this other rule would be more specific to court-ordered therapy. So the standards are slightly different as well, I think, but we didn't want to confuse the two and since we already have that adopted rule, we just left it alone and created a new rule. Does that, I mean, hopefully help show the distinction why there's 2 different rules and why they would be different from each other. Also, there's also one of the things we try to avoid is making rules too long, because when you start making them so long, people stop reading. And so it's good to have those specific topics in one particular rule, because we found people will say, well, the rule says this. I said, yeah, but if you kept going, it says, but then if the, so.
Okay, that was it. Thank you for entertaining those questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is part B that I referenced in your report. Let me preface by saying specifically, Madam Chair and Ms. Smith and Mr. Francis. 10 November, we had mentioned Ms. Smith had said we can't meet because 11 November, that's correct. That's Veterans Day. But the day before is the Marine Corps birthday. In light of what has happened in Afghanistan, my discussions with various veterans is that they feel betrayed. Keep in mind that I have shared with this board on and off record that I have dealt with Marines who have had 11 combat tours in Afghanistan. That's 77 months of direct action. There are 400,000 veterans in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex alone. We as a state have some of the highest amount of veterans in the country. With that, veterans are returning home. They have a lot of issues. They've seen a lot. Some, I won't go into specifics, but yes, they have killed women and children. And given the context in which they've done it, they were human missiles. And there's a quick story that I think I shared with the board one time early on when I first started. And that was a counselor that my understanding, this was told to me by one of the former executive officers, that this service member went inside to talk to a counselor in another state. And the counselor began to ask this military personnel who had on a uniform, had he killed anyone? And he said, yes. And so the counselor asked him to describe the situation. He did. She runs out, she calls the police come, not with weapons drawn, but at the ready. And a counselor in this facility happened to be a veteran and ran out to see what was the matter. He quickly intervened because the officers, unbeknown what was going on, didn't know, and they had their weapons almost at the ready, and he diffused it. And so this Army personnel could have literally been shot or worse over this person's inability to counsel this combat veteran. And so the counselor, who happened to be a veteran, said, I'll take all veteran cases from now on. What happened, the word passed that this person, not to be seen, don't go to this person, go to this person. That's going to happen, BHEC representatives. That's going to happen where you have
Chaplain Stallman.
Who out of combat, and a lot of folks, and that people know, Madam Chair, that they're veterans returning to the state, and that they've seen a lot. And with everything going on, there are veterans who don't even see movies and all of that because of those situations. So I want us to be totally aware. And Ms. Smith and Mr. Francis with BHEC, and I know there are others who serve attorneys and so forth. And Madam Chair, I just want to point this out as a very important situation. And mental health is being advocated to military personnel and their families who have also suffered with the deployments. They may not have been in the actual situation, but they were with their spouses and their sons and daughters, et cetera. And bear in mind that the last series of casualties, as this country withdrew from Afghanistan, half of those casualties were female Marines. And we've not had that many casualties in 4 or 5 years. So this is a huge situation and a potential challenge to us in the field, and the other members of BHEC, psychologists and social workers and licensed practical counselors and so forth. I want to make this go on record to say, be prepared. This is going to happen. And they are going to be referenced to some of us. And I hope that you are prepared. If you are not certain, contact those of us who have military experience. The board members know you can call me. I don't care what time it is when it comes to this veteran issue. You call me, and if I can't help you immediately, I will refer somebody who's equipped to do that, because we have got to handle this, because this is real, this is in real time, and this is going to happen. And I'll end there, but I wanted to save this since we're talking about BHEC and the reports, and since we're part of this magnificent council, I want us to be well aware and prepared as best we can to handle these situations as they occur. And you also have veterans who suffer from TBI, traumatic brain injury, moral injuries, and so forth. Just be prepared that this is going to happen. And if you need help, I'll say again, contact those. On your university campuses, for example, UTA does not describe how many veterans they have, because the veterans have asked not to be disclosed because they don't want to be spat on, called baby killers, women murderers, and all of that. So they don't advertise their veteran numbers for those reasons. So wherever you are, university campuses, be prepared, because they just may walk in and trust to them is premium. And they may walk in your office because they've watched you, they've heard you, they listened to you, and they just may walk in and one day you may be there with them for 3 or 4 hours. Okay, and all you.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Stogland, for bringing light to this really important issue. If there is anything that you feel like the board can do to better facilitate, I don't know, the mental health of our service members, I would be all ears for that. I think, Ms. Smith, did you have a comment?
Just going to say, number one, Chaplain Stong, I appreciate you saying that. I'm a clinical director for a grief center, and one of the people from Colleen are attending our current workshop. So I'm familiar with what you're speaking to. I would love it. Don't kill me, everyone. I know, fly in the wind. I would love it if Veteran Affairs would push across the nation to have part of clinical CEUs address trauma in clinical veterans. If you're going to see them, this is something that you need to take. If we're going to do sex trafficking and we're going to do suicide, then I don't know what we're leaving that part out, because that's a huge part of a population that is terribly underserved. So I would encourage that push from the VA.
Given your suggestion, if I might, I don't know the agenda, but one of the ways you could perhaps invite them in and to start a dialogue is to invite them to a BHEC meeting and discuss these issues with you. And they won't obviously give you any names, but they'll talk about trends and what the expectations are. And maybe afterwards you could invite them again. But I think if you invite them, someone will come. I think chaplains are extremely valuable to this. Sarah has been in touch with the Army, for example. I've explained this to you, to the board, about how their procedures are very key and critical. But I think Ms. Smith, Mr. Francis, if y'all invite someone from the VA, you're right there at Fort Hood, the largest Army installation the U.S. has. You got those situations. So you have the resources, and you also have others. And we'll be happy to assist you if you need it, to identify some office to do that. And I think that would be a good way, inroad, to begin a dialogue with that.
I think something else that has come up, I think another option, another thing that maybe the board should consider in the future, I'm not sure, I don't know, we can think about if we want to address this or not, but one of the things that came out of the role delineation study that AMFTRB did was that therapists are finding more need for training in crisis management, in part because of COVID, because of the pandemic. And so that they're seeing escalated rates of, just anxiety, trauma, PTSD, those kinds of things. And so it did make me curious. I went and looked at our rules, I looked at our academic requirements to see if, what do we require crisis training? And we do. It just says addiction or crisis management, but there's no hours requirement on it. And it makes me wonder if maybe in the future we should consider looking at, upping that standard in terms of, adding maybe addiction, trauma, crisis management, 3 hours, and maybe those 3 things, because they're all pretty related. I don't know. That's something that maybe, again, if one of the committees wanted to take that up, or, we could, I don't know, just something to think about. Mr. Francis, did you have a comment?
I just want to thank Chaplain Stogland for his openness and his willingness to share, and the vulnerability that it puts him in to discuss and speak of such things, and based upon his experience. And I know that it must bring back memories. And so I just want to thank him for making sure that important matter we get educated to, and that it goes on the record. So and I'll hold my other comments until we discuss things from BHEC, and I have a couple things from the BHEC meetings, but thank you for that.
Is there anything else as far as item number 14A that anybody has any additional comment on? Okay, any additional comment on, go ahead, Mr. Francis.
And I'm sorry, when I lost my 2 monitors, I lost my agenda that was up. And 14A is the BHEC, where we're speaking from notes and comments from the BHEC.
Yes, you're welcome. So if you want to jump in, now would be a great time.
Okay, if you don't mind, there were just a couple things that I was just going to inform the team about here. Let me grab them real quick, 1 second. And Ms. Smith, if I misspeak or if I say anything inappropriate or I am just off base, please call me out and make sure that we get the record corrected.
I can't imagine that ever happening with you, but sure.
Right, whatever. Okay, here we go. And I apologize, I am working at a deficit on a small screen and trying to find my sheet of notes that I actually took and prepared. Madam Chair, is not to delay the meeting. May I ask if you could come back to me in a couple seconds, please, so that I don't delay this meeting any further?
Sure.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you.
Certainly.
I'll get them and have them up.
Okay. Is there any additional comment on 14B on the financial reports? Yes, Ms. Elder, Dr. Elder.
Okay, so in looking over the BHEC operating budget as of July 31st, 2021, I noticed that there was some fairly significant numbers in the overtime pay section. And I'm wondering if as the backlog decreases, if that overtime section will decrease. And then if indeed there will be less overtime, could any of that money that was budgeted for overtime be used for our restricted travel budget?
I can speak to that. Yes, overtime is going away. No salary can't be transferred to other buckets.
I was afraid you'd say that, but thanks.
Yeah.
Any additional comments on 14B? 14C? 14D? I do have a question about 14E. I just want to make sure that I am reading this rule change correctly. Essentially, this is just, I guess, maybe codifying in the law that there's not a mandatory that we are not mandated reporters in these specific areas, that if we have a request that obviously we respond to it, but that this does not like create a duty to report. Am I reading this rule change correct? To 611?
I think, yeah, in chapter 611, the Texas Health and Safety Code, I think you're correct. It's not a mandatory duty to report. What it says in 611-004 is that a professional may disclose confidential information, and it lists a whole bunch of instances when that they're allowed to. And I think what that amendment is essentially doing is, it's codifying in the statute that they're not, you're not going like in some of the, duty to report child abuse in 261 of the Family Code. That's a mandatory requirement, or chapter 611 or chapter 81 of the Civil Practice Remedies Code, where sexual exploitation by a mental health service provider, that's a mandatory. There's no discretion. This is basically saying it's not to be construed as a mandatory duty to report, but it is a permissive. This also goes back to there's case law that the Texas Supreme Court issued where there's not a duty to warn in Texas where there is in other jurisdictions. And so I think that this is in line with that Texas Supreme Court case.
And then it also sounds like it's also just affording extra protection that if you do make a report under this rule, that you can't be, sued for it. That's what I'm also reading in this rule too.
Yeah, the statute does create a civil cause of action if you do disclose information improperly, but if it fits under one of these, there's already currently in the law that same in chapter 611. But I think you're correct that if you're doing it under one of these permissible exceptions, it's not. It's either a defense or it's permitted, right?
Dr. Elder?
I noticed under 14E that, well, first of all, let me say thank you for the work that's been done on the consolidated rule books. They're amazing. I love that they begin with a list of here are the rules that have been changed, because that's incredibly helpful. You don't have to just read through the entire thing again. But I did notice in the most recently published edition of the Consolidated Rulebook for MFTs, which I think was September 28th, when I went and looked, the chapter 611 is the old version without these changes that were put in 14E. So I think that this new 611 wording needs to be added to our consolidated rule book.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Elder, I'll make sure that gets changed.
Thank you. And then we kind of we went quickly through C and D, and I have some questions if we could go back to those. Okay, so I have a question in looking at budget information in 14C. I'm wondering if our new, much more efficient complaint resolution process leads to fewer cases ending up in SOA and therefore a lower budget line item necessary for SOA cases and SOA services.
Dr. Edler, can you explain the first part of that question again? You're wanting to know if there'll be less of a budget, less of a need for a SOA budget in the future because of the new efficiencies?
Maybe I didn't say that wrong. Right. Let me try again. I'm assuming that our streamlined ethical complaint resolution process would result in fewer cases ending up needing to go to SOA because the ISC process is so effective. Therefore, do we owe less to SOA in the future? Because I know part of the big budget issue about travel is, well, we have to pay SOA this amount of money, so we're going to take it out of travel and put it to SOA. But I'm wondering if SOA expenses are going to decrease just by nature of being more efficient in our complaint resolution process.
I don't necessarily think so. I think it's possible. That's a possibility. But I think one of the issues is that, as you see in that large group of cases and weeding them down, having SOA and using SOA is necessary. Really what the issue comes up with, the real issue is that our SOA's budget writer, which is, I think it was House Bill 1, which is a several hundred page bill that has all of the budgetary items for the different agencies. SOA has its own provisions. And so, what they do is it had a list of agencies that just said any cases you send to us are covered by general appropriations, and you don't have to pay an hourly rate for those cases. Psychology used to be on there. So whenever we sent them any sort of cases or anything, it's two agencies working together. We didn't pay them an hourly rate. Well, when they went through, the Legislative Budget Board went through, they just cut psychology out, but they didn't add BHEC in. And so that's what created the problem. So from my understanding is it was an oversight when they did it on SOAs, not necessarily ours, and they didn't create a line item to give us specific money to go to SOA. So there wasn't any appropriated money for that specific issue. And so my understanding is when they come back, they're going to add us back into SOAs. So I think we're talking about two different things, but does that address your question?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would
And
be
Dr.
curious-
Elder?
I was
if I can
about to ask you a question. Yes. If
I can add a little bit more color to the SOA piece of it, I would happen to be looking at that and knowing that the September invoice that Daryl sent over ran about $4,000 for SOA. And at that point in September, we did not try any cases during that month. And so we're receiving bills for things that are happening like mediation. And I don't fully understand that piece. I have some questions that I've sent over, but even during what it looks like are light months, it's a significant bill. And so my guess is that it's not going to get any better. It will only get worse because these cases extend for such an extended period of time. But that would just be a little bit of color to it. I'm not going to pretend by any stretch of the imagination I'm an expert on SOA billing. Like I said, I've got questions out to Daryl in regards to it, but that's just what I've happened to see and notice on it.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. That's helpful. I'm curious from yourself and perhaps Mrs. Smith, discussions that are being had at the BHEC meetings about travel of the member boards and what the status of those discussions or decisions are.
Go ahead, Mr. Francis, if you want to take that.
I was going to ask if you wanted to go first.
The bottom line answer is nothing different. I wanted to address the statement to Mr. Hyde. Perhaps you could let the listening audience know, when will the next budget review come up where SOA gets to add us back in? Because that's the shooting mark that we're going to be looking at, is how much we're having to run it until SOA adds us back in as a budget line item.
It's the next regular legislative session will be when that comes in. So it's 2-year mark.
There was a meeting, Ms. Elder, Dr. Elder, in regards to the committee to try to formulate a policy around travel. And I will tell you that both sides are pretty well supported. Obviously, I happen to fall on the side that I think that a budget should be provided to each of the member councils. But there were people equally like John that was very adamant that that's not what we should be doing and representing to the constituents of the state of Texas. And so many of the other councils have not traveled as we have, or had the opportunity to have such innovative ideas of having meetings at locations to allow folks to come and view how we operate and how we conduct business, which I think is very important and very necessary. So I think that continues to go on. The question really becomes, is there money? And how much of money will be available? So obviously some money can't be moved from one budget line item to the other, but there were things that I was asking about in regards to, I know that we're not going to use all of our startup budget. And so, but I don't think that can be transferred. I know that we're gonna have savings this year of, hold on one second, I will tell you exactly what the savings will look like. The savings, we're coming in what looks like right now, and forgive me if I get this slightly off. Looks like we're going to come in like 16% under budget, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen next year, because some of the budget recognition that we saw were obviously positions that were not completely filled in terms of the BHEC budget. So yeah, I don't know. I personally think that it's something that can be budgeted, and that's the position that I'm taking, but it's something still to be debated and still to be discussed. So,
well, I thank you both for your representation and advocacy, because I too think that it's very important. At the very least, if we're not traveling to hold board meetings in different places, at the very least that we as board members have an opportunity to attend stakeholder conferences and interact in that way.
yeah. The only other thing that I would say in regards to budget is that we had a fee committee meeting on, I guess that was last week, we had the fee committee meeting. And Ms. Smotherman, please feel free to jump in here. I know you were a strong component and part of making the fee thing happen, but the fees for this particular board will pretty much remain the same. And the amount that we give back to the general fund will actually be a little bit less than what we previously have done, based upon the recommendations that will be presented to the overall board. That's the recommendations that's going to go to the BHEC board from the fee committee. What we're also discussing is, how do we prepare and look out a year from now, and at the most maybe 2 years, of going to a flat fee structure? Because at that point, we'll know exactly how much it costs to run each of the organizations. And so if an organization has 1 or 2 additional steps, then yes, maybe that costs a little bit more for an application there. But theoretically, with everything combined, there should not be such a wide range of fees seen amongst the different groups. There is a philosophy and a belief that was discussed about the earning potential of individuals based upon their profession, and that the fee should be also take that into consideration. And I'm actually kind of curious to hear other people's thoughts on that. My initial position is that someone's earning position potential should not be part of an application fee. And so, but I know that was one of the considerations that was discussed there, but just wanted to bring that up. Mr. Motherman, am I missing anything there?
Mr. Francis, I'm sorry, Ms. Smotherman had to leave us at 11.
Oh, sorry.
That's why I wanted her to speak when she could. She's already left us at 11. To answer two questions that might be in your minds for this board is, the answer is no. If we have an overage that we didn't spend the money, it doesn't get to roll over here. It's done, it's done. So we want to spend as much as we possibly can to make sure we continue to get that, because that came up. Our BHEC meeting is on Tuesday, and these will be coming up again. I will tell you that one of the recommendations to the licensing standard about fees was that we drop our CEU hours, so it costs our licensees less. And that was voted down by every board to not lower the CEU requirements. So just letting you know what's going on in related to what Mr. Francis was talking about in the fee structure.
I'm so glad we have you both there to advocate for us.
Yeah. The other position that I'm taking is that we're recognizing the 16% under budget for this year because all the positions were not filled. But every year that I've been on this board, I've never seen all of our positions filled, and that there's always been vacancies. And if we can look at the average number of vacancies per year and take that average and say, what percentage under budget will that bring us? I think those are funds that we could then apply to travel. And I think it's just a matter of being creative of how we look at the budget, because I don't foresee us ever coming in at that. But I know that Daryl's position is that so is going to cost us more money. And so that's really a position that he's taken. And I don't know enough about that to speak intelligently about it, so I have to get more information. But I think from a personnel perspective that there's always savings that happen there, because there's always people transitioning in or out. And so the amount of funds that we talk about are much less than the salaries of individuals. So I think that's a possibility there. Thank you.
Mr. Francis or Mrs. Smith, do either of you have additional report from BHEC?
No, I don't, Chair Merchant. Most of the things that I've talked about, I kind of didn't wait to this one big lump and kind of sprinkled it in because I wanted to address it as it came up. And so I don't have more addition to it. For anybody that wants something brought up or discussed, as always, please email either Mr. Francis or myself so that makes it into, I'm kind of operating with what I think is best and then asking you guys, but I want your feedback on what you want me to advocate for, what you want and what you think is unique and wonderful about our license.
I think we lost Mr. Francis, it appears.
We still have a quorum.
Yeah. Is there any further discussion or questions about 14F, the report on the audits? Okay, then we are going to move on to item number 15, which is our report from our board administrator.
I'd like to kind of feature the web page as part of my report. So I'm going to share that for a moment. If I can get my mouse to move across the screen. Where is it? There it is. So you should be seeing, yes. This is the homepage of the Texas Behavioral Health Executive Council. Each of these member boards is an active link if you haven't stumbled across that. So for marriage and family therapy, as with all the boards, there are quick links down the right side. So this is the marriage and family therapy page. Under board news is, if you scroll down a bit, is a recap of rules that became effective in September in chapters 881, 882, and 885, as well as chapter 801. That's the 801.205 concerning remedy for incomplete license requirements during a declared disaster or due to a declared disaster. And then you can also see what rules are currently under public comment in chapter 882, 884, 885, and in chapter 801. So I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to share with you that if you have not previously provided a fingerprint for the issuance of your license, you are now required to provide that fingerprint for the renewal of your license. And on this quick link here, you can see fingerprint information if you'd like to know more about that process. It's described here on this page. And there's a series of frequently asked questions for that. So I invite you to look at that page when you have a moment. And please know that you can renew, all renewals are online. You can renew that online up to 60 days in advance of your expiration date, then complete the fingerprint process. During the online exchange, you'll be provided with a code. And then after staff receives the report from your fingerprint process, then only then can they renew the license. So I encourage everyone to renew early and pay attention to that renewal thing. Staff is taking a lot of extra steps to try to make licensees aware of this new process. One is you'll get a bright blue postcard in the mail if your address is up to date. So please update your address if you've not already done so. And they're also sending an email about 45 days before your expiration date. So if you don't have an email address in your profile, please add that. And then you'll get an extra prompt on that in that regard. We've had a lot of questions or a number of questions about how to contact the board. There's a page, a quick link here at the bottom for contact us. Scroll down a bit to the email us web form. You can select the program you want to direct it to, for example, marriage and family therapy. And then there's also a feature if you need to submit a document to the board, there's also an upload feature here. So use that process. And just a quick advertisement then for, as been mentioned, thanks to Brenda for those statutes and rules and those consolidated rule books covering all of those. And you can see those consolidated rule books are here. The last update date is included, so you can see how, oh, I didn't mean to click that button. You can see how that's included. And I think I'll stop there.
One comment I want to make is I really do like the new comment, the new contact the board, where you kind of pick a topic because y'all previously just had like, if you're emailing about this, use this address. If you're emailing about this, use this address. And I think this is a much easier
one-stop shop.
Exactly. So I like that. I really like that improvement.
And if I could add one more thing, I forgot. I guess I'm sharing that. So back at the home page, you can find our how-to user guides. So all of the things that are about using our interface, there's a step-by-step guide with screen captures. So if you would check that out, because this is our how-to user guides, and the quick link is over here on the left-hand side. There's a module for the LPC supervisors to manage their supervisee information. That module has gone online, and there's a how-to guide for that here. We are working on the social work module and producing a how-to guide for that. And then the MFT module is next. So just wanted to let you know that's coming down the road in the future, and I'll keep you apprised of that progress. That, I believe, is it for my report, unless you have any questions.
I have two questions. Question number one, how are we doing on the supervisor portal? Like, I know that had been a conversation for a while that maybe like where the supervisors would upload all the documents, showing that, like they do for like LPC. Do we have any idea of when that's going to happen, or is that still, I don't know, do we know anything?
I don't have a time frame at this time. I don't know if Mr. Spear is able to give a projection.
I would project that it would happen before summer of next year. I don't know an exact date.
Thank
But
you.
the good thing about it is the supervision structure is very similar to that of LPC. And since LPC is what was used to create the original module, it should be pretty easy to port it over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, Sarah, were you going to talk about the LPC meeting, or did you want me to talk about that? Maybe I should have put that in my board report.
This is about the academic requirements. I can.
It's up to you.
So there was, you'll have to correct me if I misremember. I believe there was a rules committee of the LPC board. Their staff had encountered a number of applicants from various schools who had a marriage and family therapy degree, and they applied for an LPC license. And because of the academic requirements, the way those rules were written, staff was not able to award them a license. Staff had to send them a deficiency notice for one or more missing courses. LPC, depending on the degree, has to go through on a course by course basis, checking that transcript. And in some cases, I believe it was a secondary ethics course that was required, which they didn't have. In other cases, I believe there was a practicum that was missing. It varied. It wasn't just, oh, if we change this course requirement, everybody else sail through. They're snowflakes. Everyone takes their own electives, and so different things were missing. They invited Chair Merchant to join in the meeting because of her role at Abilene Christian, and some other people were invited for input as well. And I can't remember. I believe that more discussion was going to ensue on that rule change, and certainly the whole rule process would need to go through if those rules were changed.
Yes, so currently the LPC board did meet, they did adopt a rule change. We're essentially moving from this structure of these, I don't know, it's like 11 or 12 classes are required. It's more like a salad bar. So you have like these 5 or 6 classes are required, and then you have to choose, 5 of, these 8 classes. Anyways, that's open for public comment. So that's just kind of an update on that is open for public comment currently. I think that also closes October 30th or 31st. Dr. Elder, did you have a comment? I'm sorry, let me go with Patrick first. Patrick and then Dr. Elder.
That rule is going to the council next week to potentially propose for public comment. The 681.83 rule is not currently out for publication yet. So it needs to go through the council first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So this is Dr. Elder, and I would just say for our representatives from MFT who advocate for us at the BHEC level, I'm quite concerned about this change. I was part of the original rule committee meeting for LPC who discussed this change and fought adamantly against it, because 4 out of the 8 core KCREP required classes and content areas that the licensees have to pass on the NCE are now becoming optional courses. And this, I think, makes it, we're setting our licensees up for failure. You're not required to take this class, but you're going to be tested over it. So I think that's a problem. You have to know it to be licensed. And second of all, I think the other problem is just reciprocity. Our LPC, if we're moving toward endorsement with other states, I think it puts us at a disadvantage to have licensees who don't have those core classes. And it would make it harder for us to practice across state lines. And so I would ask that our representatives keep that in mind during the BHEC discussion of this potential rule change.
I would advocate the opposite, to be honest. I'm actually probably for the rule change and actually feel like it doesn't do enough. I would actually like to see the rule be a little bit more lenient, but that's just because the rule, I think it I don't know. I'm in the opposite direction, I think. I think I would like to actually see the rule be a little bit more lenient to make it a little bit easier for people with alternative degrees to become LPCs. That's okay. We don't have to be on the same page.
I just want to remind that while we are there to listen for BHAG and to ask questions, which I'm more than happy to do, as I'm pretty well demonstrate all the time. But if it is a rule that has gotten approval from a member board and they want it passed and we see nothing, we don't have the discretion other than to say, send it back and work on it. We don't have the discretion to do anything else but that. So I just encourage those of you that have concerns over this to continue to contact your individual board to speak up and let them know we don't like this.
Oh, I'll be submitting public comment. Thanks.
Okay, any other additional questions or comments about agenda item number, what are we on, 15? Okay, then let's move on to number 16, discussion and possible action regarding future priorities and activities of the board. So what future activities would you like for us to address? Dr. Elder?
Okay, so several issues I think that we've already addressed, the social media guidelines versus the AMFT telehealth and telesupervision guidelines. Did that get referred to a committee to discuss? Okay. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that I am aware now of 2 clinicians who got caught red-handed violating our rule about sleeping with clients, and their ability to practice was taken. And so they just said, all right, I'll just change my website, call myself a coach, and keep right on trucking. And they are currently functioning with vulnerable individuals, just like they did before they got in trouble. And one individual that I know of has now slept with a client twice and continues to keep on trucking. And so I'm quite concerned about this huge loophole. And I know that, if you're calling yourself a coach, it's non-jurisdictional for this board. And I went and looked, did some research on coaching, and yeah, it's in there, suggested recommendations for how to practice, that you don't sleep with a client, but there's no teeth because there's no real certification or regulation. And so I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can do to protect the public from these nefarious actors?
I'll weigh in on this. The coaching is not a regulated industry that anybody can call themselves a coach. You don't have to have a degree of any sort. If you want to set up shop as a life coach or whatever, you get to do that. Unfortunately, and I hear your concern, and I share your concern very much so. I think the only thing that we can do is pretty much, as sanctions are made public, I don't know if there's anything that we can do, because I think that is that loophole when you're dealing with moving from a regulated agency to a non-regulated industry, and there's not anything I don't think that can happen with that.
Attorney Hyde?
I would agree as well. I've actually gone to, just because I wanted to look into it, years and years ago, went to the association-y type thing of coaches. It was scary what is talked about there without licensure. I think that this is something that as a board, we might not can actually have any purview over. However, I would like for, and I can say this because I'm on this committee, I would like the outreach committee to kind of look at, is there a pamphlet that could be produced. That
You're cutting out again.
we are able to take the kind of talks about benefits of licensing and why to talk to a licensed professional. If that could be
Ms. Smith, the last thing I could clearly understand was outreach committee. If you could turn off your video and try again.
Okay, so I asked her to type it and she says, of course, I was saying that this is a public education issue and perhaps the outreach committee could look at this.
something that could be
Maybe educating the public on the difference between therapy and life coaching, just so the public is aware and maybe know how to spot the difference and file a complaint when needed, perhaps.
Madam Chair, to answer your question about what future priorities, of course, I've talked about the military issues. I'd like for that to be addressed in some way, how we can help veterans and their families. The other is Ms. Smith talked about it, human trafficking. And Dr. Barti, you could help with that because you are a professor and an administrator. I think it'd be good to hear from a university perspective on how best we can do that. And you right there in the Fort Worth and the Metroplex area. And you have the largest naval operations, and it's called the NOSC. It used to be called Naval Reserve Active Center, but now it's called the NOSC. It's one of the largest in the United States Naval Services. So you have resources available. So I think it'd be good if maybe if you contact them or call me offline and maybe I can help direct you to that. And I think, Madam Chair, that would be good if we did that and so forth, and human trafficking, but military and their families, military person and their families. The other is, I'd love for us to, I know Daryl Spinks and Sarah have spoken to us about the inability to host us because they don't have room due to renovation and so forth. And prior to that, COVID. But maybe if we could look at another location in the spring sometime to have a in-person meeting. And I don't know if budget allows for that since we were talking about budget issues. Don't know. I know when we were LMFT by ourselves, we could do that in the spring and we were successful in doing it. So just food for thought. That's a suggestion and not an edict. But if we could look at that as an option in the spring and see what a budget is, maybe we can have an in-person meeting in the spring outside of Austin and come together and have maybe some of these opportunities that we've talked about this morning. Those are my suggestions at this point. With that, I'll yield.
Are there other priorities of the board or future directions you'd like to see, things you'd like to see the board address?
I just had a follow-up question. First of all, let me read Ms. Smith's last comment about educating the public about coaching. She said maybe we could create a pamphlet to distribute that would speak to the choice between a therapist and a coach, just to educate the public. But also I wanted to ask, which I think is a great idea. In the past, we had some discussion about AA MFT supervisor candidates qualifying as supervisors. And I think my understanding is that we were kind of on hold until some research was and data was gathered about that. And I'm just wondering what the status is of that project.
Sorry, would you repeat your question?
So I think that there was a question in the past about AAMFT supervisor candidates qualifying as supervisors for Texas as LMFT supervisors. So, and we were going to do some research and get back on that. I'm just curious about the status of that project.
Thank you. I should have mentioned that in my report. I would like to thank staff and especially Brenda for spearheading that effort. Many of our files have been now scanned and are in the database. So I am in the process of going through those to see if I can determine and identify which current LMFT supervisors were awarded based on that AAMFT candidate status versus an AAMFT supervisor status versus the other requirements for supervisor. And as soon as I then identify those, then I can do a search for, is there a higher frequency of complaint for those three categories? Or whatever I can find by comparing what statistics we have in the database. So I have begun that process. It will be a long process. Just because we didn't tag that as a particular field in the database. So it's akin to my looking through their paper files, one piece of paper at a time. I'll have to read what's been scanned to try to glean that information. But thank you. I did mean to report back on that in my report.
Well, thank you for that update and for your hard work. That's quite a project.
And speaking to that, Dr. Elder, I think one of the things was that what is the percentage of supervisor candidates that actually complete the process? That go through the completion of the process, that if they drop out and they still and they are granted LMFT supervisor status and they drop out of the AAMFT, does that address exactly what we're wanting to address? Because I think what we're wanting is, if you're an approved supervisor, AAMFT approved supervisor, how would that correlate with an LMFT state approved supervisor? And a candidate is still in the process of acquiring that status. And I just don't know what the numbers are, how many start that process and then actually complete the process. Because it is, you got the course, then you have the supervision aspect of completing all of that.
From the information that I could glean from AAMFT, they don't know who is a candidate until they apply for approved supervisor. So they didn't have numbers to provide as to how many began the program and ended it. And so unless the candidate or that approved supervisor who's supervising that candidate reported out of their board, which they are not obligated to do, we don't know. And we have already, under our rules, provided them an LMFT supervisor status based on their candidacy. So I have no data to provide in that regard, and I appear to have exhausted my avenues for finding that out.
Mr. Francis, did you have a comment?
No.
Okay, any additional items under 16, things that you would like for the board to be looking into, looking at? Okay, then we are going to move on to 17, which is public comment.
So for public comment, we have no one here in person, so we won't be taking any public comment from them, but I would like to do a little housekeeping. For those of you attending by Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment. We'll go through each of those attending by computer, by video first, and then if anyone has attended by phone, I will then call on them. So when you are asked to unmute to provide your public comment, please identify yourself and any organization that you represent. Please know that the public comment is not intended for a discussion or a question and answer session with the board members. Additionally, all public comments will be limited to 3 minutes unless otherwise directed by the presiding officer. You do have the opportunity to provide public comment during the meeting, or you may submit written public comments via email to general@bhec.texas.gov in advance of the meeting. Please use the email subject line public comment and enter the meeting date when you send that in by email. And only those written public comments received by 5 p.m. on the last business day prior to the meeting will be submitted to the board members for their consideration No written comments received will be read aloud during the meeting. Please know the public comment section is not intended for specific discussion about an application or about a complaint. So with that, I will look at the attendees. Sandra Martin, you have public comment?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I just have two comments. One is in regard to the discussion about the number and nature of questions related. I'm sorry, my name is Sandra Martin, and I am governmental liaison for Christian Counselors of Texas.
Thank you.
My first comment, again, related to jurisprudence exam and the number and nature of the questions related to BHEC. In the social work board meeting a week or so ago, Mr. Spink spoke of the noontime period of time at noon. They have arranged for a lunchtime meeting with the public. And he mentioned in that meeting that at that point in time, a week or so ago, 1,400 people had signed up for that noontime luncheon. So I just wanted to mention, and I get questions all the time, some I can answer, some I can't, but there is a huge public need and understanding that they need to know about BHEC and what BHEC is and how it works and so on and so forth. 1,400 people are never going to be able to ask all the questions that they have to ask in that short period of time, but just an indication of the desire of the public to learn about BHEC. Take that into consideration, please, when you're considering the questions that you add or cut or leave in regarding to BHEC on the jurisprudence exam. The second question, I just wanted to commend a woman named Pamela Berminder, who is an LMFT supervisor. I'm an LPC. She is our representative to your board. She was attending board meetings probably before most of you were on the board. She's very understanding of your processes and your issues, and she is an excellent representative. I just want to commend her. She may be here today, I'm not sure. But her name again is Pamela Berminder, so you will be hearing from Pamela. She does represent Christian Counselors of Texas in the governmental liaison group. So thank you for your attention to us and your reception of us. And again, to the gentleman who always mentions the great state of Texas, thank you. And good to be with you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I see no other raised hands, but we do have a caller. Caller, do you have public comment?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? This
Yes.
is Pamela Berminder, and that was not arranged. I promise you. So surprised. But I am Pamela Berminder, and I am a license holder in the state of Texas. And I wanted to just provide a few mentions. One is that as a representative of the governmental liaison and Continuing Education Committee of the Christian Counselors of Texas, we do want to express very much a heartfelt thanks to Dr. Marti for his exceptional ethics presentation at our CCT conference August 12th. Very thoroughly and professionally, with timely, helpful information on regulations from federal to state to BHEC to TSBE, MFT, including telehealth and best practices. So we are very much appreciative of his presentation. Also, I'd like to mention, as a license holder, I would like to extend a thank you to the staff for the consolidated rule books and the expansion of the website with useful FAQs and information. It's so helpful for many of us in the license holders to keep up with the changes that are rapidly going over these past years. And finally, I wanted to extend an appreciation to the board members for how they very consistently, with open, candid, and deliberate discussion of very important dilemma topics, as we are living in times when there are so many the significant overlapping events that are impacting people's lives and the mental health, and also how BHAC and the professional licensing boards are having to navigate through them, like licensing mobility, portability, telehealth, and supervision requirements and jurisdiction considerations. And all of this while governing and maintaining the legitimacy and quality of the MFT profession for the services in Texas, and also in the primary role of protecting the residents of the great state of Texas. Thank you, and I appreciate your service.
Thank you. I see no other raised hands or callers, so I believe that includes public comment.
Okay, then we'll move on to number 18, announcements and comments not requiring board action. Just, I guess, some updates. We have the BHAG meeting, as we've already mentioned, is meeting next Tuesday. And we also have the BHAG webinar, Insights Over the Lunch Hour, an opportunity to visit with executive staff. I am so sad I'm not going to be able to be present with that. I think that'll be a really interesting meeting. I'm so glad that BHAG is doing that and increasing just access, the public's access, or licensees access to BHAG. So I'm excited about that. That'll be, I guess, that next Friday. Yeah, next Friday.
Correct.
Let's see here. Other things that are maybe going on. Our next board meeting is January 21st. The BHAG meeting after that will be February 1st. And so those are the only things that I know of coming up right now. TMFT will be sometime in April 7th to 9th. And so those are the only announcements I have. Do y'all have others, things that we need to be aware of? Okay. Well, then that means that we are moving on to agenda item number 19, which is adjournment. So I hereby adjourn this meeting at 12. Oh, actually, I need a motion.
Madam Chair, can I make a motion that we adjourn, please?
Second.
Okay, so I have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned at 12:13. Thank you so very much for you all being here.
Thank you.